Welcome to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid. A set of conversations about our government, our politics, and the kind of country we aspire to be. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath, on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Well, it's Saturday again. I don't know how we got here so fast, but seems like we were just talking. It is another gorgeous day here in Chicago in the upper Midwest. Look, I know a lot of you are worried. A lot of you are scared. I mean, what's going on? We have a madman in the White House, and he's a terrible president who seeks to be an even worse dictator. He's coming after our elections for sure. And I thought a lot about that. And I don't want you to be afraid. You needn't be afraid. Look, here's what makes America exceptional. While others may fall to would-be dictators, particularly those who gain control of government, we will not. What we celebrate on the 4th of July isn't the declaration that said all men are created equal, but the years of struggle since then that taught us to believe it. Look, the long struggle for freedom and equality in America has so many heroes. Back in 1921, poor white miners in West Virginia's Logan County protested for safer working conditions and livable wages. The local government promptly jailed their police chief because his crime was sympathy for the workers. 10,000 miners then marched towards the jail over Blair Mountain. But President Harding sent armed federal troops to stop them, and in the battle that followed, 16 miners were killed. Many more were wounded. And the strikers were forced to give up their weapons and to go home. And yet, their battle inspired a movement that eventually prevailed. Back even further, in the 1780s, Abigail Adams wrote to her husband John and implored him not to forget the ladies as he joined efforts to draft our Constitution. Well, it would be another century and a half and the sustained efforts of suffragettes before women would be allowed to vote. But look, of all our struggles, the long and painful fight for freedom and equality for Black Americans is the one that most explains the American character, that speaks to the best in us, and every day reminds us of what we may yet aspire to be. Of course, most people know this. The first casualty in the Revolutionary War was Black. Crispus Attucks was shot down by frightened British soldiers in what became known as the Boston Massacre. Outrage at that shooting helped push colonists to rebellion in the name of freedom. But for some of our founding generation, the freedom they sought was the freedom to hold other men in captivity. Our nation, a nation dedicated to the proposition that all are created equal, and chattel slavery, an institution that denies this claim, were born together. That they could not survive together was known even to the founders. And 77 years later, the nation was at war to decide which would endure. And when that bloody Civil War ended, Americans elected Black members of Congress. But Jim Crow, the terror of armed vigilantes, sometimes wearing white robes, and the economic oppression of sharecropping stood in the way. From the Civil War to the passage and signing of the Voting Rights Act, Black Americans tirelessly reminded the nation of what we stood for. Frederick Douglass, George Washington Carver, Mary Church Terrell, Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, A. Philip Randolph, Paul Robeson, Marian Anderson, Jackie Robinson, Dorothy Height, Vernon Johns, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Fannie Lou Hamer. We should never forget these names. Because during an entire century, when America was happy to be done with legalized slavery, but willing to continue the brutality, the oppression, the inequality, these people taught us about our better selves. The story of Black freedom in the United States is not just a history of overcoming oppression. It is also a record of contribution to America's wealth, to our scientific leadership, to our artistic brilliance. So many overcame so much to deliver immense benefits to everyone else. And as this history unfolded, it informed our most profound understanding of who we are. The struggle for Black equality in America was never just a struggle for Black America. It was a fight for all of us. It was Jacob wrestling with the angel to become who he should be. Look, I am a white Jewish American, but this is my history too. It is all of our history. It is no matter what Donald Trump and his ethno-nationalist government attempt to do, the unerasable heritage of American freedom. And look, lots of nations began by breaking free of oppressive empires. We weren't alone in that. But why is freedom and equality held more firmly in America than in those colonies that won their independence in the last 100 years? It's not because of a promise in our call for independence. Everybody did that. Look, paradoxically, we are more free because so many Americans were not free and yet believed in the promise of freedom, and for generations fought and died to make us all believe too. There is not one day since our founding that some Americans have not fought to be treated as equals. Not one day where some Americans have not failed to demand the freedom that was promised. Every day. And this long fight for civil rights, for equality, for freedom, it did at least as much for the idea that all men are created equal as did the writing of that proposition in a political manifesto in 1776. And not the Civil War, but the epic struggle that followed finally wedded the idea of freedom to the idea of America. Wedded, can't be broken apart. That idea kindled the fires that led to women's suffrage, to workers' rights, to marriage equality. Fealty to it drove Americans to the streets just last year in Chicago and Minneapolis, when ICE agents arrived armed and determined to take our neighbors and friends and tell us we could do nothing about it. I am a proud American because this is who we are. The Obama Presidential Center, which opened this week, tells this story, the story of those who kept faith with the idea of equality and whose efforts over time forged the idea of freedom into the very concept of America. We will not lose. In this perilous moment, take heart and remember who you are, who we are. I have a great show for you today. Dr. Maya Kornberg is up first. She's a great scholar of Congress, actually, and we're going to talk about that. I spoke to her Thursday, and I spoke to Greg Sargent after that. So both of those are pre-recorded, fabulous interviews, and I'll be back right after those to talk to a great reporter about what's going on in Washington today and to a great political leader about what's going on in our states. You want to stay tuned.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid, on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, I am joined by Dr. Maya Kornberg. She is a senior researcher in elections and government program at the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU Law. She is the author of articles and papers and books, and her soon-to-be published book could not be more timely or important. It's called, funnily enough, Stuck: How Money, Media, and Violence Prevent Change in Congress. And it'll show up just about the time we need the next Congress to figure out how to make itself a little more popular than, say, I don't know, a thunderstorm at a picnic. Maya, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me and for making time to discuss what I think could not be a more timely topic.
Yes, right. But before we get into why it's timely now, I want to ask you, as I know Americans are frustrated with Congress. Chicago had a street called Congress Street. We renamed it.
Wow, I
You
didn't even
know,
realize that.
yeah, it's Ida B. Wells. Forget Congress. Nobody cared that Congress was gone. Um, People are frustrated with it. I just don't think highly of it. But I want to ask before we get into now, hasn't it always been this way? I mean, people have complained about Congress since the dawn of time. Um, you know, was it ever better?
So certainly Congress is an institution that people like complaining about. I think
Yeah,
you're right about that. But I make the case frequently as a congressional scholar that Congress has changed a lot, even in the last 50 years, which is the period in which I focus my most recent book on. And people used to believe in Congress a lot more than they do now. There was just a poll released saying that only 10% of Americans approve of the way that Congress is doing its job right now. That is a near historic low. So when we're thinking about, has it always been the case? Well, it hasn't always been this bad. And if we look at why Americans might be feeling that way, Congress is underperforming by a lot of metrics. It is passing less laws. It is, meeting less frequently. There are more government shutdowns than we used to have. So there's a lot of reasons to point to as to why only 10% of Americans might be approving of the way that Congress has done its job. And I think that is new, the kind of the scale of congressional ineffectiveness and frustration with Congress.
yeah. And this discontent with Congress that we have right now, your point is that it is not vibes, it's based on performance.
It's hard to pin down why people are unhappy with Congress. And there is a paradox that we know in political science, which is that people tend to like their individual congressperson a whole lot more than they like the institution.
Right.
I do think that obviously part of any favorability poll is vibes, but I think that there is good reason to think that Congress is not doing enough, as I mentioned, and I point to kind of structural issues that are really inhibiting individual Congress people, really preventing them from, delivering for the American people and doing their jobs in the way that people wanted them to when they elected them. So that's
Well,
part of what I try to do in my research.
let's talk about that. So for regular listeners of mine know that I have made the point for years, and I realize it's a little simplistic, but that uh, Citizens United and radical gerrymandering broke Congress. That individual members work for the map makers and the money, and not for the people who elected them in this system. I'm sure that is true, but I'm sure it is not completely the story. There's more to it, and I'd love to get your sense of what broke Congress.
Well, first of all, I think that you are right to point out that money is a major distortion. That is part of the reason that the subtitle of a book called Stuck About Congress is how money, media, and violence prevent change.
Mm-hmm.
And I would actually point to an earlier Supreme Court decision before Citizens United, which is the Buckley v. Valeo decision in 1976.
Yeah. Explain that to everybody, because it was also the on ramp to Citizens United. But yes,
100%. Yeah. So in 1976, the Supreme Court in the Buckley v. Valeo decision rules that spending limits are unconstitutional in campaigns. And as a result, money starts flooding campaigns. And that is when I think we see things start to change in terms of money distorting pathways to power, even within Congress, not to mention running for office then becoming a lot more expensive. So one of the stories that I tell in the book is of Henry Waxman, right after the Buckley v. Valeo decision, starting a leadership PAC. He understood that now money was the name of the game, and he represented a safe and a very affluent district in Beverly Hills. And so he had a lot of money, and he was campaigning to be a committee chair. And so he thought, okay, I can only donate so much money from my campaign committee to other members. But if I start what's called a leadership PAC, I can donate more money to other members to literally curry favor and campaign by paying them. And he ended up winning the chairmanship. Now you fast forward 50 years, almost every single member of the United States House of Representatives has a leadership PAC, and they exchange money to build relationships with each other. Members are now expected to pay dues to the party, sometimes millions of dollars to the party. And this is kind of an expectation, especially if you want leadership positions in the party or on committees. And so there is a literal pay-to-play system in Congress right now that I think cannot be understated in terms of the way that it distorts things. And certainly that started with Buckley v. Valeo, and then it accelerated with the 2010 Citizens United decision that you just mentioned. I think that that is a major, major distortion, and I would completely agree with you on that. But I think that there are also other factors that people don't
go to the other factors yet. Let's stay with this one because I want to go back. I know you said it and you were very clear about it, but I want to say it again because it's so unusual for people. People have figured out that money makes a difference in who gets elected, right? But your point, which is astonishing, is that money passed around Congress by congressmen makes a difference in who gets committee chairs, who gets in the leadership, right? Who sets the agenda that gets on the table, so that it's not like when you elect your members, they show up and they are all equal and they all have the same votes.
Right.
Turns out that if you are elected from a fabulously wealthy district and you are a good fundraiser, you end up having a bigger voice within in interesting ways.
100%. Yeah. And I think that it's not just if you're elected from a wealthier district. This should also concern us because it reinforces structural disadvantages that are faced by groups with less access to wealth in general in the United States. So in my book, I tell the story of Marcia Fudge, Congresswoman who represented a largely working class district, saying to a staffer, I don't know how I'm going to leverage my constituents and my constituency that I represent in order to pay the dues that I need to pay to the party. So again, that is wild to think about. This is not a member saying, to your point, this is not a member saying, I don't know how I'm going to raise the money that I need to get reelected, because that costs a lot of money these days. This is a member saying, how am I going to pay off the party? How am I going to pay my dues to the party that I need in order to move ahead in the chamber? And so we know that women have less access to wealth in this country. We know that working Americans have less access to wealth. We know that people of color have less access to wealth. And when that makes it, we know that makes it harder for them to run. But just to reinforce your point, I don't think we talk as often about the fact that that makes it harder for them to build power once they are elected.
Yeah, I mean, Rahm Emanuel got into leadership very quickly when he was a congressman, and he did it because he was a superb fundraiser.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's just the name of the game now. There is a great new book by a political scientist named Danielle Thompson called The Money Signal, which argues that even when you're looking at who's a viable candidate and you're in a party or in a kind of a candidate pipeline, you look at fundraising. So, the kind of discriminatory effects of that start early on. And it is difficult to overstate how different this is from what it was just 50 years ago. Yeah. I think people assume, especially young people, that it was always this way, that this was just always the way that it was. But in the book, I also tell stories of, Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman running in Brooklyn in the early 70s, running against an incumbent congressperson, mind you, and she was told you need to raise $100,000 to win. She was able to raise only $30,000 and she won that seat. Now, I'm in Brooklyn now, and the thought of, even if you take into account inflation, the thought of anyone being able to run for office, let alone unseat an incumbent by raising the equivalent today of $30,000 is just unfathomable. Unfathomable.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Okay. So, and it's not just that you need the money to build those relations. The congressmen themselves, the congresspeople themselves, they don't actually spend the same amount of time with each other they used to. I mean, partly the money has them focused out raising money all the time. I mean, back in the day, Bob Michel and Dan Rostenkowski, two leaders from different parties, but both from Illinois, would drive to DC together.
Yeah.
And they were, I mean, that kind of building of relationships doesn't exist. It's much more transactional.
100%. And I would point to the 1994 election as a major inflection point in the story of why members are no longer just friends and sending their kids to the same school in DC. It used to be, several decades ago, that members all lived in DC. And so they had a chance to get to know each other in a more social setting. And again, their kids would go to school together. They would go to the same neighborhood barbecues. In the 1994 Republican Revolution election, which was a huge group of new freshman members who were elected, Newt Gingrich became speaker, and he really actively discouraged members from moving to DC and encouraged them to keep their families in the district and just commute to DC when they needed to. Also, over the last few decades, we've seen, jet planes make it a lot easier for people to commute back and forth.
DC is also phenomenally expensive now, too.
And DC is expensive. Yes, and DC is expensive. And as you're saying, there's a need to fundraise constantly and to be in the district to fundraise. And so as a result of that, there are very few opportunities for members to actually just have the kind of basic social interaction that you need in order to build a working relationship with someone. One of the things I often point to that I think a lot of people don't realize is that in congressional committee hearings, you usually have one party seated on one side of the room and the other party seated on the other side of the room, and then they're all staring down at the witnesses who are coming to testify. There was a committee that started in 2019 called the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress. And that committee was meant to introspect. It was started in 2019 so that Congress could understand what to change in its processes. But one of the things that committee did internally in the way that it worked was it had alternated seating. It had a Republican member seated next to a Democratic member. And they did that because, we just know from being humans that you just can turn to the person sitting next to you and form an organic conversation. And that makes a huge difference. That did make a huge difference in the way that committee operated. And I think, again, people don't realize how few opportunities there are for members to do even basic things like sit next to each other in Congress today.
Well, I think people also don't know that in many of these committee hearings, it entirely is driven by staff, and we'll talk about staff in a minute, but that the members show up so that they can have their moment for the record and the camera and to use in social media, and then they leave. They're not even there for most of these hearings.
Yeah, they're not there for most of the hearings. I will point out that one of the reasons why they're not there is because they're all living in the district and they fly in. There's what's called the Tuesday to Thursday Club, where many members are only in Washington from Tuesday to Thursdays, and then all the committees have to have their hearings during that time, and they're overlapping in terms of the timing, and there's, not enough coordination in terms of scheduling to avoid that between committees. And then members will come in, they have 5 minutes to speak. They will use those 5 minutes sometimes to make a kind of a gotcha kind of set of questions to the witnesses, sometimes to ask inquisitive questions. But then the staff will be there really for the majority of the time. And it's really, I think, something that, as you're saying, is kind of misunderstood often if you just look at what's happening on Congress on television.
Yep.
Because on television, you'll only see these soundbite moments that were made for TV. You're not going to see that the hearing lasted 3 hours, and maybe there was another hearing that wasn't even a salacious enough topic to make it to television.
Right.
And what was going on there. You'll only see these soundbite moments. And so one of the points that I make in my new book, Stuck, is that people don't realize that this kind of prophetic influencer power that some members have does not translate neatly into legislative power either.
Let's be clear. Some of the most media savvy congressional members in the last decade have passed the least legislation.
Exactly.
Right? And some of the ones who you don't see that often, from my neck of the wood, there are two of them. Lauren Underwood gets, she doesn't grab the camera. She just gets stuff done.
Yes.
I got a couple others like that here. Then around Congress, there are people who just went there to do the work. Thank God.
100%. And Lauren Underwood is actually a main character in my chapter on the class of 2018 and in the chapter on social media, because she says, she actively kind of makes a choice to do the work rather than kind of leaning into the social media viral moments. And as a result of that, I think she's gotten a lot done.
Yep. I mean, you can get stuff done. You can get some important things done, but the big questions that Congress has to come together to do, very hard, very hard. So that's money. We've talked a little bit about money, but there are other impediments.
Yes. So one of the things that I think doesn't get enough attention and is, again, a kind of historical trend, is that when we compare Congress today to Congress 50 years ago, power today is a lot more centralized in party leaders and just a handful of people than it was once before. It used to be that committees had a lot more power as organizing structures in Congress. And so there's more committee chairs than there are party leaders because there's only two parties. And so you had a little bit more decentralization there. You had the possibility for junior members, at times like in the class of 74, to really rise up through the ranks and get leadership positions and have legislative impact in a way that it's impossible to imagine that they would now.
Is that true for the Senate as well as the House, or is it mostly the House?
I think it's the House. You see it even more in an even more defined way.
Since when? Since the Hastert rule?
So I like to think of the 1970s as really a kind of monumental moment. But if we go back a little bit in the House, and then we can talk about the Senate. 1910, there was a speaker, Joseph Cannon.
Yeah, that's going back a little bit.
Right. So 19, but I'm just gonna give you two.
No, let's do it. I love this. Yeah.
1910. Joseph Cannon is a speaker. People think that he is too despotic in his rule, and that power is too centralized. So there is what's called the Cannon Revolt, and members of two parties actually come together. It's a bipartisan revolt, and they overthrow him as speaker. And what happens in the first 50 years of the 20th century is that really the party leaders lose power, and you see committees gain power. Then the 1970s come along. Watergate brings, and the aftermath of Watergate, actually even more so, brings what's a class called the Watergate babies in 1974. They come to Congress, a lot of really young and kind of reform-minded campaigners, and they see these deeply entrenched Southern Democrats in committee leadership positions, and they do what Henry Waxman referred to as topple old lions. They change the rules in a way that disempowers committee chairs because they want to gain power as freshmen. And what you see as a result of that, and then this is compounded by Newt Gingrich in the 1990s, and Nancy Pelosi certainly continues this in the early 2000s. Committees lose power starting in the 1970s, and you see power slowly trickle up into party leadership. So you have a system today where committees are bypassed altogether many times in writing legislation. Often what you see is a system in which party leaders, with the help sometimes of a few lobbyists, write a piece of legislation, push it down very quickly for a vote, sometimes bypassing committees altogether, and members have to vote on the legislation. Sometimes they haven't even read it.
They haven't read, right.
So how is a member going to have legislative power in that context? Yeah.
That's fair. And like, what did they do to get Cannon up? They named a building after him.
Well, it's also just impossible to imagine now. Think of a context in which right now we would have a bipartisan group of members overthrow a speaker.
Well, I mean, the Democrats bit their tongues, but they had an opportunity.
I just think partisanship now is not in the same place as obviously as it was in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
But either way, what we have now is
Republicans overthrowing their own speakers. Yeah.
Yes, and you do have a Congress in which members get elected. A lot of them talk to me about. They get elected, they come, they sit down with their staff member and they say, these are all the things that I want to do. And then the staff member just laughs in their face and says, you can't get any of this done as a freshman member. One member that I just did a event with a few weeks ago compared members of Congress to potted plants in terms of the amount of power that a rank and file member has right now. So it's really disheartening, I think, for democracy when you're electing people and they don't have power to make change because, unless they're party leaders, they're close to leaders, it's hard for them to get things done.
Okay, so that's got to be enormously frustrating for every one of the members. So what's it going to take for them to say, this is not acceptable and make, because if they get together, they can change those rules as they did in 1910.
We are sitting here today, just a few months ahead of the midterm election, and there could be another wave election year. We don't know yet, but it
Yes,
looks
we do.
like
There will be.
but it looks like there definitely
Yeah.
could be. And one of the things that we know about wave elections is that there is a lot more collective power at those times. So I mentioned the class of 74, that was a wave election.
Huge wave.
And
Yeah.
so they were able to change rules and take power away from deeply entrenched leaders because of that. 1994, that was a wave election. A different set of things happened then, but Republicans and Newt Gingrich as Speaker really reshaped congressional procedure in a very serious way in the 90s. And if we have another wave election this year, then members elect have to think about what they're going to vote on in a rules package in January and what they're going to push for. And when I spoke to members of the class of 2018, for example, which was another wave election year, they told me that they knew that Nancy Pelosi would need their vote for speakers. And that gave them a little bit more sway, a little bit more influence over what they could ask for as freshmen. So I do think that there could be a moment that we are on the precipice of where Congress can change some internal rules.
So I've thought for a while that we need to have a few people elected in this next Congress who are less focused on the issues that have been the issues of my lifetime, whether that's healthcare or war and peace or the economy or civil rights, whatever those issues are, and who think like Madison, who are interested in how do we structure the institutions of government so that they are durable and democratic, small d democratic, right? That I took it for granted most of my life. It really wasn't a big issue. It's an issue now. So your book is going to help, but who are the members that you think are there who are really thinking about these kinds of questions?
So first of all, I just want to reinforce what you're saying. We need also members who are focused on the kind of process and small d democratic issues. I do think that it is heartening to see that so many campaigns on both sides of the aisle really are focusing on anti-corruption agendas. And that includes, candidates who are really centering kind of process reforms, banning congressional stock trading, stuff like that. I think is kind of indicative of the fact that people want to see process reform, and that they are angry at the level of corruption in our system. Now, when it comes to members who are there now, first of all, I would lift up some of the members who've already started this work. I mentioned the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress. Congressman Kilmer, who just retired from Congress, spent years starting some of this work with the Select Committee on Modernization. And that Select Committee was responsible for things like, for the first time, Congress even having a centralized HR department or an IT department, or things that we would think should be basic.
Yeah.
Now that committee is now a permanent subcommittee on the House Administration Committee. And there are folks like Congresswoman Bice and Congressman Morelli and others on that subcommittee who are continuing to think about these process reforms. And I certainly hope that we elect a new crop of members who can kind of add to the ranks of folks who are thinking about this. And I certainly have a lot of conversations, including with folks like Congresswoman Budzinski, and so many others in the House who really care tremendously about making the institution work. I think there's a lot of folks, including some Illinois Congress people who care a lot about this.
Yep. All right. So we've talked a little about money. We've talked about the way power is structured in the leadership. There's also a staff problem.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that.
So in the 1990s, when Newt Gingrich becomes Speaker, one journalist calls this a time when Congress self-lobotomized. What Congress did was, first of all, to defund an entire congressional support agency called the Office of Technology Assessment, which used to help Congress understand science, which, again, I think we would all agree it still needs help understanding now. It just doesn't have a support agency helping it do that. Gingrich also dramatically decreased funding to other support agencies, like the Government Accountability Office and the Congressional Research Service and the other agencies that help Congress understand and make sense of things. He cut committee staff by a third, just a real dramatic drainage of staff, and Congress has not recovered since then.
Well, and just lay that aside, or next to, not aside, the fact that at the same time they increase the executive branch in all of these areas, so that the executive branch comes to Congress prepared in a way that Congress isn't to be a counterparty.
Right, and you're very right to point that out, because we have these parallel things, right? We have a growing executive branch and a shrinking legislative branch. And
Yeah.
I point that out to people all the time. Congress today has several thousand fewer staffers than it did just a few decades ago. And yet we're expecting it to stand up to the executive. We're expecting it to stand up to Trump. We're expecting it to conduct effective oversight. Well, how can it do that when it doesn't have the brain power to really hold its own? I think that is really a tremendously self-inflicted problem that Congress has to contend with.
Yeah, it's a hard vote to tell in a tough time you're going to spend more money on staff in Congress when Congress isn't popular. It's a hard vote, but they have to be able to explain that the executive branch isn't popular either, and the overreach is terrifying.
Yeah, and I make this point to people all the time when I talk about Congress. If we want Congress to actually stand up to the executive abuse of power, then we can't just bemoan its ineptitude. We have to help it get better, right? We have to actually strengthen it. Things aren't working. I just wrote a book called Stuck about Congress. So I'm certainly not arguing that they work perfectly, but
Yep.
I wrote that book because I think we need to, more than ever right now, think about unsticking it. We don't have the luxury of waiting, because when we don't have a strong Congress, then we're going to see less of a check on an executive branch that is already, running wild.
Yeah, I mean, let's take a minute or two about the present problem. So Congress has ceded power in every imaginable place. We see on the money side, we see deficiency, where the president spends money Congress never authorized. It's a crime. It's happened. We see, oh my God, the word's just gone out of my head. What's the word for the other side, where he doesn't spend what he's supposed to spend? Impoundment. So we see deficiency and impoundment. So the money side, he said, the Treasury's mine. I'm going to do what I want. Congress could do something about that.
Yeah.
We see war, where both on the issues of taking us to war and now of signing a peace, Congress is saying, well, maybe we don't have anything to say about going to war, and maybe we don't have anything to say about treaties. I mean, all of this stuff is, I mean, there's this little book here, but people have read this thing that says, no, this is your job, for God's sake, do your job.
Yeah. Again, I think that the war powers and power of the purse are two major areas where the Constitution grants Congress power over them, and Congress has been ceding this power to the executive. And I know I keep talking about the 1970s, but I just think that the parallels are very clear. 1974, Congress passes the Impoundment Control Act. They did this because President Nixon impounded tens of billions of dollars. Congress can stand up to these things. And right now, there are conversations in Congress about how to strengthen the Impoundment Control Act and how to get rid of some of the loopholes that presidents in general and Trump in particular have manipulated in the existing statute in order to not spend money that Congress has already authorized. There are conversations right now in Congress about how to strengthen the 1973 War Powers Resolution, which was passed because of the Vietnam War, and how to strengthen congressional war powers. So, Congress has stood up to executive abuse of power before in these exact areas, and it can do so again. And again, this was not even that long ago that we're talking about in the grand arc of time when some of this was passed. So, there's one thing for the Constitution to grant authority, as we've seen. There's another thing, to actually how it actually plays out in practice. And that's why you need Congress to stand up again, to strengthen the Impoundment Control Act, to strengthen the War Powers Resolution, and to really take back some of this power.
Congress is an enormously powerful institution if it wants to be, right? So except, but that then brings me to we have another branch we just have not talked about.
Right.
Congress thought it dealt with money in politics. But as you point out, Buckley Vallejo, Citizens United, there's that third branch that sometimes thinks it writes laws. I mean, does Congress have to, as part of the ability to reform, does it need to not just change its relationship with the executive branch, but to change its relationship with the judiciary?
Certainly, I think that in areas where the judicial branch falls short, Congress needs to take a more active stand. I mean, if we look at voting rights and the Calais decision, Congress needs to do more if we're seeing a Supreme Court that is hollowing out the Voting Rights Act.
Right. So how does Congress protect that? But certainly there's Supreme Court reform, but I mean, the radical in me says after we win, we say we're not seating any member who comes from a district that violates the Voting Rights Act. We don't care what the Supreme Court says. Now that is, of course, a terrible thing to do, and we should never do it, right? But I lay it out there as like, you listening, John Roberts? America's talking this way because of your abuse. And Congress,
Yeah.
are you listening? Do something.
Well, I think two things are important from what you just said. First of all, the institutional legitimacy and faith in institutions cannot be taken for granted. And I think that's something we're seeing with the Supreme Court right now.
They're less popular than the Chicago City Council.
Exactly.
Everybody goes to jail. Yeah.
Exactly. And again, and it's not difficult to understand why. It's the same that we were saying about Congress. I do think that Congress can pass strong legislation like it tried to do with H.R. 1 and in other instances that strengthen voting rights.
Right.
And instead of, relying on the Supreme Court to do things. I also think that there are Supreme Court decisions that put even more of an onus on Congress to strengthen itself vis-a-vis the executive. For example, the Loper v. Bright decision a few years ago, what's known as Chevron deference. So for years,
all of this major questions doctrine stuff.
Yeah,
is
exactly.
An attempt to say Congress do more work.
Exactly. And I think it'll be interesting, to think about the Trump v. Slaughter case and kind of other cases that relate to separation of powers. Again, as you're saying, all arrows point to the same solution, which is Congress strengthening itself and taking more on, and not punting to the executive, not ceding power to the executive, not assuming that the Supreme Court, can be relied on for some of these things.
Yeah. Well, or not being willing to let the Supreme Court take it away.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, there are abilities. There's some clauses in this Constitution that let Congress decide what the Supreme Court has jurisdiction over. Those are interesting questions that are going to have to be fought. So the top three things this next Congress could do are what?
It's difficult to choose just three because there's so much that needs to be done.
Top eight. The must do's.
No, I think three is a good number. I always think three is a solid number to go with. So must to do's. Congress desperately needs to expand its staff capacity. I know we talked about that, and that might seem mundane or even unpopular to folks, but it has to do that because it needs it to stand up to the executive. Congress desperately needs to take back its power of the purse, to actively strengthen the Impoundment Control Act, and to strengthen, for example, the Government Accountability Office, which is the support agency that's supposed to conduct some of this oversight. It really needs to focus on this and to focus on war powers reform and other things to take back some of the power that we're seeing President Trump really usurp. And I'd also point to, and I hope that a new freshman class can push this across the finish line, Congress is just not organized for success right now. It has not reformed its committee jurisdictions. We didn't really talk about this, but it has not reformed its committee jurisdictions since the 1970s. We are all flummoxed as to why it can't regulate the tech industry. Well, that's because it doesn't even have a tech committee. The last time, committees were reorganized was before the internet existed. So Congress needs to modernize committee jurisdictions, create a tech committee that will actually be able to try to regulate this ballooning and completely underregulated industry. And it needs to really think about organizing itself for success. It's not just the staff capacity issue. It's not just give it more resources. And that's why I wanted to kind of make this a separate point from the staff capacity. It's not just, let's pump it with money. No, we also need to think about the way in which internal structures in Congress are organized so that you're organized for success.
Would you head back to stronger committees, or is there something that I haven't thought of that would be a way to both have strong leadership and empowered committee structure?
Certainly, I think that we need to strengthen committees, and that would be a way to decentralize power. I've also been arguing for strengthening subcommittees.
But what about the
further-
jurisdictions? The jurisdictions of the committees seem dated to me.
Right. So as I was saying, the last time that committee jurisdictional lines were redrawn in the House was the 1970s. So completely outdated. So
Yeah.
you shouldn't be surprised that when Mark Zuckerberg comes in to testify, half of the Senate is there. And we know you've worked in organizations, I've worked in organizations, when everyone is in charge of something, no one is in charge of something, in essence. So you need a tech committee if you want to regulate tech. You need generally committee jurisdictions that align with the modern American economy. That's what committee jurisdictions should do. They should align with the kind of economy that you're trying to regulate. And we just don't have
That's
that.
interesting.
So
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
something that I think we desperately need to do. And if I could just add one more thing, I think that Congress just desperately needs to handle campaign finance reform, and needs to pass legislation that that really takes aim at some of these nefarious forces. We see a public that is really hungry for change in this, and that is really angry at Congress and at politicians. And I want to see politicians who center anti-corruption and center getting big money out of politics as part of their platform.
Yeah, I'm hearing it for sure. But here's again where I fear Congress, no matter what they do, the current Supreme Court will say you can't do it. So we're going to have to deal with both of those.
Yeah.
None of this conversation has been about, okay, look, we've driven the partisanship that's caused these problems by single member districts. Do you take time and think about multi-member districts or proportional representation as ways to take some of the poison out of our politics?
I certainly think proportional representation could take some of the poison out. But even before we get there, I've been advocating for us to expand the House of Representatives. Nowadays, members are serving about 1 million, just under 1 million constituents, 750,000 constituents. The first Congress, they served 30,000 constituents. So, when we think back to the beginning of our conversation of why people are so angry with Congress not doing its job, how could you possibly be serving adequately 750,000 constituents? So we need to expand the House, and certainly we need to do that together with thinking about other innovations like proportional representation, and we need to ban partisan gerrymandering. I think all of that has to happen hand in hand.
Yeah, I think proportional representation takes some of the teeth out of the map making, no matter who's drawing the maps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but yeah, it's this is the work of decades to make the changes you're talking about, and yet there's incredible urgency to do it right away, because it feels like the country feels like we have lost faith in this.
Yeah.
And these institutions, we're going to find some other way, and it's not going to be this democratic way if these institutions don't get their act together. That's the threat right now. So can these changes happen quickly? Did they ever, when in these past reforms?
Right. And I think that's exactly where I was going to go. My theory of change is that sometimes policy changes seem to us like they happen overnight, but the reality is that people have been seeding those changes in conversations and in pushes to build policy coalitions and in other things for decades. And then you have to seize the moment when it comes. And so, for example, the changes that I just mentioned in the 1970s, when Henry Waxman and others were, quote, toppling old lions, those were not changes. Those were changes that they helped get across the finish line. But folks who were in Congress already, like Bella Abzug, were pushing for those changes. And in my book,
pounding the table for them, if I remember correctly.
Exactly. And in my book, there's a story of Bella Abzug in a committee hearing when freshmen are pushing for a certain reform. She turns on her mic and she says, reinforcements have arrived, right? So again, there are people in Congress already who are pushing for these changes. And hopefully in November, we have some reinforcements that can arrive.
Maya, I really appreciate this conversation, and I couldn't agree with you more. Every big change we've ever had happens after it's already obvious. Right? People are like, it'll never happen because everybody knows it should happen and it hasn't happened, so it'll never happen. And that's when it happens.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and in your book, tell everybody when they can get it because it's certainly timely.
So my book is already out, and
it is. I'm
available.
sorry.
Yeah. Recently out.
I know where I'm going next.
And it's available wherever books are sold. It is again called Stuck: How Money, Media, and Violence Prevent Change in Congress. And it is meant to help us understand how we got here in order to understand how we can move forward and unstick Congress.
Well, again, I'm going to go get the book. I hope everybody else does. And thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. I'm here with Greg Sargent. He is, of course, staff writer at the New Republic. He hosts their fabulous Daily Blast podcast. He's the author of Uncivil War, Taking Back Our Democracy in an Age of Disinformation, and Thunderdome Politics. And he has, unfortunately, while I've been paying attention to the fabulous stuff at the Obama Center in Chicago, he's been paying attention to like J.D. Vance. So I got the better end of the deal. Hello, Greg.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I am doing great. I've been to the new Obama Center. I hope everybody gets the chance. It really is a joyous place. But our news in DC is less joyous. I mean, you can't keep a reflecting pool from turning into green slime. And we now have this terror. Well, I guess I'd love your thoughts on this. Donald Trump, signed, I guess, his surrender at Versailles. But I'm not sure he had a choice because he also lost the war.
Right. This is probably the least bad options of a range of options. But of course, the reason we're in this situation is because he started this damn thing in the first place. I think this is lost on a lot of people. But before he decided to start bombing, there were talks going on between the U.S. and Iran, and there were actually the outlines of a deal coming together, as much of the reporting indicated, and probably one that would have been better than this one. And so because Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth decided that they wanted to blow a bunch of shit up, we're now in a position where Iran has realized it's got more leverage over us in the global economy than it ever really knew it had, and this is Donald Trump's doing. He screwed us.
And the whole world. I mean, giving Iran certainty, not some theoretical idea, but certainty that they can actually shut the Straits of Hormuz is giving them something that's as powerful as the nuclear weapon that they've been trying to get.
Yes, in fact, I think we joked on the podcast at one point that somebody did actually finally give Iran a nuclear weapon. It was Donald Trump.
Yeah. I mean, and the consequences, I mean, I want to think of China's a big winner in this, in part because the world got some sense that betting on oil isn't the only way to go. We're the big loser in this. But his other allies here, Saudi Arabia and Israel, are terrible losers.
Yeah, I mean, nobody really likes this deal except for the countries that want to see us fail. So good work, Donald Trump. I mean, the whole thing is a catastrophe on every level. And this is even before you start factoring in the enormous costs of this war in terms of lives lost and money spent, which oddly enough isn't even part of the equation in any sense, but it absolutely should be. Donald Trump screwed our country. He absolutely screwed us with this whole thing. And it was because he got it into his head that if he was strong in his head, right, whatever he thinks he means by that, he would walk out with a world historical triumph that he could compare favorably to Obama's Iran deal. there was actually reporting to the effect that he was telling his aides, look, it really drives me crazy when they compare what I'm getting unfavorably to Obama, what Obama's getting. And the reporting also said that he was instructing his advisors to find some way, any way at all, for him to be able to say at the end of this that he extracted more from Iran than Obama did. So this is what it's been about from the very beginning, and it's absolutely absurd.
Well, so what kind of I mean, there's so many things that he has done that have been bad that he's been able to change the subject and hide. And the Republicans and the right-leaning media have helped him at every step of the way. But I just don't think you can go fight and lose a war and tarnish America's reputation in the world and damage the global economy and empower Iran and find a way to change the subject. I think this one's going to stick to him.
I do too. I think it already has, and his approval rating's in the 30s. So they're going to really work very hard to spin the gas prices starting to go down, if they do, I guess, and other prices as proof that he's now got everything in hand. And they'll try to say the story they'll tell will be something like this: Iran wouldn't deal with the U.S. Donald Trump was strong and powerful and did what everyone else refused to do, made them come to the table. Yes, we had some sacrifices in the short run, but now everything is coming back to normal and we're all the stronger for it. That story, we're going to have to work extremely hard to not let them get away with that crap, because that's not what happened. What happened?
It's not what happened. I mean, what's the answer to that besides laughing in their face?
It was a catastrophe. Yeah, no, listen, it's hard. It's going to be a challenge to tell the right story. But I think you have some Democrats out there who are doing it pretty well. Chris Murphy had a pretty good tweet I think it was this morning, responding to J.D. Vance and basically saying, we can criticize this peace while also maintaining that it was never right to go into this war in the first place. In fact, the reason this peace is such a catastrophe is because you got us into this needless war. And so
lost it.
I'm hopeful that Democrats will get out there and really make the big case that has to be made.
I think they will, but I don't think this is only Democrats. I mean, I know some people who are Trump supporters, and they're just disgusted by this.
Yes, that's good to hear.
Yeah, I mean, disgusted. This is everything, I mean, he took us into a war for no reason. He didn't buy, he had a State of the Union, Greg. He spoke at the State of the Union and didn't tell us we were going to war. And 2 days later or 3 days later, here we were at war. He didn't think it was worth bothering with the American people. He never gave us an explanation. And now that it's done and he lost and we're paying the price and the whole world is paying the price, he's going to try and spin it as something else. Fat chance, buddy.
Well, that's exactly right. He feels no obligation whatsoever to explain anything to the American people, is the truth of the matter.
How much money did his kids make on this folly as defense contractors?
I don't know. Yeah. Well, it's going to take a Democratic Congress to figure out a lot of this stuff, and I'm hopeful that, with a Democratic House and possibly a Democratic Senate as well, one of the things they'll do is rip that apart. Just look under every sofa cushion and find every last little bit of corruption that these assholes engaged in.
I hope so, Greg, but I don't think they will be able to, because the Trump administration officials will ignore every single subpoena and no one in the Justice Department will force them to comply. We have a real constitutional problem.
Well, that's why Congress is going to have to find some spine, a Democratic Congress, and exercise their own powers to really enforce these subpoenas. And I know that's a tall order, and there are problems with that. But the bottom line is the mindset is what's important. They should be willing to maximally use every last little bit of power that they have to force accountability on these people for what they did to us.
I totally agree with that. So let me focus on one part of this story, because I know you've paid attention to it, and that's the role of J.D. Vance. Because I can't figure it out. He's somehow leaking the story that he was never for this war, and now he's like the man in charge of the terrible peace. But Donald Trump is a genius. I mean, like he's on all six sides of he's on six sides of a square that only has four sides. That's how crooked he is. But what's the deal with J.D. Vance and this war?
Well, look, he's in a very rough spot. I think Virginia Heffernan, who's a contributing editor at the New Republic, who was on our podcast the other day, put it really well. She said that Vance is going to be on the hook for the war and for the peace. And that is going to be something Democrats have to make sure happens. The story Vance is going to be telling is that the war wasn't his idea and the peace he wants. And then he'll cast anyone who opposes the peace or criticizes the peace in any way as someone who wants more and less war. But J.D. Vance doesn't get to disassociate himself from this war. He doesn't get to disconnect himself from it. He defended it publicly in every conceivable way, and there's no real reason for anyone to accept the story that his spinners have kind of put out through pliable reporters and stuff, that he was a skeptic of this thing. I mean, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but there's no reason to give him the benefit of the doubt on it. He's part of this administration. He's the number two, and he defends Trump vociferously in every conceivable concept, no matter how vile and how destructive this president gets.
Well, I mean, I think for J.D. Vance, being associated with making this bad peace deal with this bad war is actually better news for him than J.D. Vance is trying to get Donald Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act and declare martial law to protect his ICE troops in Minneapolis. I mean, the man has got such strikes against him. I think his political career is done.
Well, I sure hope you're right. I watched him on The View, and he got knocked around a fair amount, and that was all very good. But I also saw someone who's thinking very hard about how he can appeal to the middle. And that's got me a little bit apprehensive, and I think we need to pay attention to that.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I had Jack Jenkins, who's a reporter on religion on my show, and he pointed out that, J.D. Vance has got this new book, and the cover of the book is a Methodist church talking all about his Catholic connections. I mean, he's a fraud to his core.
Well, he is that's for sure. He's certainly an opportunist, but I think we've got to be careful not to see him as only an opportunist. He's, in some ways, a real ideologue. He's a genuine ethno-nationalist. He's a real believer in, the ideas that are pushed by what's been called the new right. I guess it's the MAGA right or whatever. And he is a pretty shrewd guy, and we got to be aware of that, because he was obviously very, very prepared for this interview with The View. He was out there. He didn't lose his temper once, even though he was getting pushed very hard. And he made it look as if he was game, and he made it look as if he was somewhat chastened by the lines of questioning. I thought he was well coached for it, and I think that's something to be aware of.
Well, if the Democrats are lucky, J.D. Vance will be the Republican nominee. And I agree with you. Anybody is dangerous. He has a core, but what he stands for, this ethno-nationalist thing that is the core of his politics, is not the majority in America, will never be the majority in America. And what is it, 28% maybe? He's not going to win an election at 28%. It's going to be a slaughter. So bring it on if we know how to campaign. And I think we do. I mean, any of the candidates who are likely to come out of a Democratic primary should know how to deal with that.
Yeah, look, I think that if Democrats face J.D. Vance, they're probably narrowly favored. I think I'd probably rather Democrats face him than Marco Rubio, I have to say, although I think Rubio probably would have a different set of weaknesses. I do think Vance is going to be very badly damaged by his association with Trump and all of his catastrophic policies, the war, the tariffs,
the ICE. I mean, the list is like, Greg, I talked to a couple of weeks ago now, maybe a month ago, the head of the Democratic Party in Indiana. And she said, I'm often asked in my state to say a few words. And I get up to the microphone and say, okay, I'll say a few words, but they're going to be Republican words. Doge, Iran, tariffs, ICE. And she goes through the list. I mean, it's just, you can't defend that in a campaign.
Right, I think that's right. He's going and look, the first year and a half of Donald Trump's second term has basically served to entirely discredit all the ideas that J.D. Vance really holds dear. Now, he's going to go out there and he's going to say, we pacified the border, we secured the border. I think Democrats are going to have to make some concessions around that a little bit, although I
Sure they are.
really hope that
Easy.
I think the border numbers are something that Democrats will have to think about how to address for sure. But overall,
Yep.
the immigration record's an absolute disaster. And
Yep.
they lost the country on that. They absolutely lost the country on immigration.
Yeah, I think they did. I mean, it was an issue they didn't like, but look, Kamala Harris didn't lose by a lot, and it was the most
Right.
chaotic. Yeah.
I mean, Donald
So,
Trump and J.D. Vance lost the country on immigration.
oh yes, they did. Absolutely, they did, and they're gonna keep it up. I mean, they're not giving up on their dream of eliminating people of color from America. They are at it full tilt, and I see ICE is active here in Chicago again. It's an ugly sight. A little more subtle than the last time, for sure. But
Well, that's true, and the same thing in Minneapolis. Look, the new guy, Mark Wayne Mullen, is easy to make fun of, but he at least gets that they've got to keep ICE out of the newspapers and out of the headlines. Like, he's aware of that, and Stephen Miller didn't see things that way. Stephen Miller wanted this violence, these ethnic purges, these kind of violent fascist displays to be very prominently in the headlines because he's loony enough to think that stuff plays in Trump's favor. And by the way, let's just say this: thank you, Stephen Miller, for single-handedly destroying Donald Trump's advantage on what was once his best issue.
yeah, I agree with you in the politics, but the actual costs in lives, in families ruined, it was so big that I can't give him any. It just was horrid. I mean, you also have paid attention to that other ethno-fascist, but now also the richest, the first world's trillionaire. And you wrote about Musk and his relationship to the horrible racial attacks that went on in Belfast. That was interesting. Talk a little about that.
Well, I'm glad you like that piece. We worked hard on that one. It's up at tnr.com for anyone who wants to read it. It's about Elon Musk and how the rioting in Belfast, the race riots, the pogroms in Belfast, essentially reveal the future that Elon Musk actually wants.
Yeah, I mean, so I read the prospectus for the SpaceX IPO. And by the way, I've told this, I recommend it to everybody because it's really good summer science fiction beach reading. But the three pillars of this thing, I don't know if you had a chance to look at it. One of the three pillars of value for this company that's now made him a trillionaire is Grok. And he says, my AI, Grok, is trained on X, and that makes it the most honest and truthful piece of technology in all of AI, and that's what we are going to bring that consciousness to the stars. Wow.
Yeah, well, it is pretty remarkable. He's really wrecked Twitter. Unfortunately, I think it's still got a lot of influence, although I do think it's somewhat diminished compared to what it was before he took it over. But look, his Twitter is, as we wrote in this piece, it's one of the ways that he's able to incite race riots and incite pogroms. He's got a tool. This is why he bought the thing, right? He bought Twitter in order to be able to mobilize people for violent fascist displays like the one in Northern Ireland. And look, the problem we all face is that a fair number of journalists and opinion makers and editors, high-level editors at the biggest news organizations, most influential news organizations, still, to some not too small degree, allow Twitter to shape the way they view both the world and the political climate. And I think they're getting a highly distorted picture of those things through Twitter, but it's a problem that a lot of journalists have decided that they're going to accept that price to be on there.
It's a huge problem. I mean, to turn it all off and go for a walk, America is not the sewer that these guys think it is. I mean, I live in a city that's been racially divided forever, and yet black and white Chicagoans don't hate each other. I mean, when ICE was here, everybody was working together. about, to
Yeah.
defend the city. I mean, it's an amazing thing how if you get out and talk to ordinary Americans, Republicans and Democrats, there isn't as much hate out there by an order of magnitude than you see on Twitter, on X.
Well, 100%. And what we've seen in cities like Chicago and Minneapolis is the counter story, and it's the right story. It's the one that shows where the American people actually are on all this stuff. And by the way, we wrote a long piece about the politics of immigration in which we got into the good work that your governor, J.B. Pritzker, is doing. And we talked to his staff, and I'd like to bring this up because it's important, I think, and I still think it's not gotten the attention it deserves. But J.B. Pritzker went out and told people to film ICE very early on. And his staff told me that the way they understood this, even then, was that this would be helpful in fighting what they understood to be the real ballgame, which is the information wars. And so they encouraged people to film ICE as much as possible and put the imagery online as much as possible. And I think the impact of that has been enormous and underappreciated. Everybody's phones were flooded for months with imagery of these paramilitary forces, masked men, thugs, beating people up, snatching children, snatching American citizens, doing all kinds of awful things. And their sheer thuggery really came through to the American people. And I think that's what really set in motion this decline by which Trump and Stephen Miller lost the country and the culture on this issue. And they were kind of dominant on it before.
They were, yes.
Right.
And what Illinois did, what JB in Illinois did, they not only had everybody out there doing what I think we would have done naturally, which was to document all of it, but they created an accountability commission, which not only looked at all of the film and media that all of us took when we were out there, but they held hearings and they issued a pretty scathing report that really described what happened here and raised the kinds of questions that need to be raised about how we can protect ourselves going forward. So they did a full-on defense and tried to hold the ICE folks accountable. Now, I want to say, we haven't held them accountable here in quite the way that Minnesota did. I mean, they shot and killed somebody here too, but Minnesota's finally indicted and brought at least one of them in for trial.
Well, look, I think he's been extraordinary on this issue in many ways, and look, the documenting of the atrocities has been an extremely important political and cultural development in
one that they won't let us continue to do. Right. I mean, I think it's so important that we get in this gulag that they've set up, these detention facilities across America with cameras that Americans get to see what this is. I mean, the civilian prison system isn't a secret. Civilian police forces across the United States have civilian accountability structures around them to hold police accountable, to make sure that what they do is transparent, to look into the prison systems. Here we have a secret prison system and an ICE, it's radio, I can't say these words. The Republicans in Congress just approved more money for this ICE nonsense with no additional accountability, no additional transparency.
Yeah, well, no, I agree. Absolutely. The detention centers are going to be a bigger and bigger story going forward, but I suspect that now that Stephen Miller has been somewhat chastened, I guess, at least in political terms, or now that the people around Trump who know that Stephen Miller is toxic have tried to put him in a box, a political box anyway, I think they're going to try to keep the detention centers out of the news as much as possible, and we've got to get them back in the news.
Absolutely. We can't let them. I mean, to your point, transparency, the ability to document what they're doing is essential. And the biggest example of that, of course, is the one they couldn't hide. Go back to the beginning of our conversation to document the fact that they took us to war and lost the war, and that had to sign a surrender in Versailles. They can't hide stuff like that. The other stuff they have been more successful in hiding.
Yeah, well, look, I think the Iran stuff is going to get worse. And I think this is, by the way, I should have brought this up when you talked about J.D. Vance. People are maybe not connecting Vance to this problem, but now they have to negotiate something on the nuclear program. And it's going to get harder.
Who negotiates for us? Who's our team, Greg? Is it J.D. Vance? Is it the dynamic duo of Kushner and Witkoff, who've done such great job for us all around the world? Who's doing this?
Well, I don't know who's going to be doing this next round, but I strongly suspect J.D. Vance isn't going to want to be too closely associated with it.
No, he's too busy trying to find fraud in the rest of the country, right? So he can abuse.
Yeah.
I mean, Greg, I think one of the reasons why we did so badly in Iran, why America was so blind to what's going on there, is that starting last September, when Donald Trump issued that dangerous presidential national security memo that said we are turning our intelligence apparatus against Antifa in the United States, the fruits of which are the indictment of the Southern Poverty Law Center and the raiding of a voter registration group in Ohio last week, that this is what they're focused on, instead of saying to the president, no, if you do this, they will close the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, they're just, the things that we have done for decades to make Americans safer, these terrible people have turned against us. And the proof that they're paying no attention to the real threats we face is that we lost a war to Iran.
Look, I think just to go back to J.D. Vance for a second, it's going to be really hard for him because he's going to have to explain the fallout from this war. He's going to be the front man. Because, look, people forget this, but after the midterms, Donald Trump is going to be even more checked out. And next year is when the presidential race really starts up. And all of a sudden, scrutiny on J.D. Vance is going to get a whole lot more intense. And he's going to have to be able to explain away a whole bunch of failures on a whole bunch of fronts, because things are going to get worse in this country going forward, and he's going to own that, and it's going to get a lot harder for him. And look, I think we can't overlook the fact that he's a pretty clever politician, even if he's an unlikable guy.
I agree with you. I agree with you. He is. I mean, Donald Trump is ill. Clearly, he looks terrible. Every time you see him, he looks worse. And so I assume Vance is going to take a bigger and bigger role. He's going to have to, as Trump is asleep more and more and taking care of his health more and more. I don't know if Trump finishes 2 years in office, really. So you're right to say that J.D. Vance should be the focus of a lot of Democratic attention, for sure. But before we get to that election, I think we have to hold every Republican in Congress responsible for this. How many times, did they have a chance, an off-ramp that they didn't take that brought us here?
Yeah, it's pretty amusing to watch them all sort of shriek with horror at this deal. I mean, you guys didn't know that Donald Trump doesn't give a shit about anything but himself? You really didn't know that? Like, come on, right?
So yes, they are. How do they duck this in Congress?
Well, I think it's going to be very hard, but the marginal ones are going to try and point to certain statements that they gave, which are supposed to show that in some sense they tried to resist what Trump was doing on any given front. But look, the dynamics of midterm elections are very hard to overcome, and we've been through enough of them in our lifetimes to know that it's just very, very hard for the party in power to escape accountability in the midterm after the presidential race. And, look, we've been on the other side of it when Democrats were right in 2010 and 2014. You'd hear Democratic strategists say things like, well, we're going to turn out, we're going to go and find our voters, we're going to spend, $100 million extra dollars on trying to turn out voters, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and it all sounds great, but it just gets washed out by the fundamentals.
Yeah, although 4 years ago, Democrats did better than we thought.
Well, that is true. That is true, although that was sort of a unique situation, a little bit akin to the 2000 two midterms, which were colored by the September 11th attacks. This one, the 2022 ones, were colored by Roe v. Wade being overturned, I think, which wasn't as seismic as 9/11, but was somewhat seismic, and I think allowed Democrats to substantially limit the losses. But every single sign we're seeing right now is that this is a fairly conventional midterm in this sense. If anything, it's quite pronounced, these dynamics. We're seeing Democrats win by very large margins in a lot of special elections. It's got a real 2014 and 2006 feel to it in just about every way that I can see.
Greg, I want to we are out of time, and so I very briefly just want to ask you about the pulling of the nominee for DNI and the chaos that is caused in the Senate, and the president saying, I am going to not cooperate with the legislature at all if they don't pass the SAVE Act to make it harder for people to vote. That isn't going to go anywhere despite his behavior, is it?
I tend to imagine the worst case scenarios a lot, so I'm preparing myself for some sort of possibility that the SAVE Act passes. But right now, it does really seem like Republicans don't want to pass that thing, and they definitely don't want to end the filibuster to pass it, because they're now looking pretty squarely at a very possible loss of the Senate. And this is not me saying it, it's them saying it. You've got Republicans leaking all over the place that the Senate is at real risk. I would think ending the filibuster now is not something they want to do.
No, I would think not. All right, Greg. Well, thank you so much. I'm sorry we've run out of time. We just have to do it again and again. I really appreciate it.
I love coming on. Thanks so much.
You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Yeah, can you hear me?
All right. Sorry about that, everybody. I am thrilled to be joined now by Eric Michael Garcia. He is the, of course, fabulous bureau chief of The Independent. And my God, he does great work. Eric, thank you for joining me again.
What's up, Edwin? Thank you.
So I want to send my appreciation to you and all of the folks in our nation's capital. The reflecting pool now reminds me of home. It looks like the Chicago River on St. Patrick's Day.
No, well, I was born in Chicago. I was born in Skokie. Like we moved when I was like 2, but like I've been back to Chicago a bunch of times. I thought the same thing. I was like, oh man, it's St. Patrick's Day in Chicago.
Yep. Wow. And now I hear the president is out trying to get a reporter indicted for putting his hand in and ostensibly
something like that. Yeah, it's really weird, man.
Crazy stuff. I actually don't want to talk about the crazy president and his crazy new airplane and any of that stuff. I actually want to ask you sort of more serious stuff about what's going on in Washington. There must be chaos. We lost this war in Iran, right? There's got to be chaos in Congress.
Unequivocally, if you just look at the baseline objectives of what the White House said the goals were, which was no uranium enrichment for the Trump for Iran, take out its ballistic missile capacity, and take out a hostile regime, a regime that's hostile to the United States
and its proxies,
like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Lubnania, a failure on every mark. And I think the thing that you see is that the Democrats, they didn't like this war. They didn't want this war. They didn't want this war to begin with. But they also are trying to say that, look, this was a failure, and Trump is giving away more than the 2015 JCPOA that Barack Obama negotiated. And on the Republican side, they see this as an outright concession. They see this as the Trump administration giving away the farm. Now, the House was out this last week, and the House is a little bit more isolationist. The House GOP is more isolationist. The Senate is full of those old Reaganite hawks, and they see this as giving a credit, the $300 billion reconstruction fund. They see this as
insane.
They see this as worse than than what the Obama administration was doing with unfreezing sanctions. Though it's not really the United States giving the money away; it's the GCC countries. So they see this as a failure, and it's really difficult because going into the midterms, the White House and Congress should be on the same page. The White House and members of Congress in the Senate, in the Senate should be on the same page, and they're not. Trump also this week, of course, canceled the confirmation hearings of Jay Clayton, who was going to be the director of national intelligence. This is coming at a time where we have a lot of foreign nationals on U.S. soil because of the World Cup. Which later on I'm going to go watch some games, but it's a great time. It makes you feel so American. But like the point being is the White House and the Senate are at a huge disconnect at this point, and they see this, and Senate Republicans see this as a failure, and it kind of is.
Okay, so how loud are they about saying that?
I mean, so you've got the really loud ones. You've got the person who's really loud about this is Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz from Texas, who
still remembers, of course, that Trump accused his father of killing Kennedy.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
but you have to remember Ted Cruz. I guess you could say he's part of the hawkish anti-Iran wing. If you remember, he had that big debate with Tucker Carlson last year. We had that whole mix-up. Ironically enough, Lindsey Graham is kind of taking a wait and see approach which is surprising to me because the whole reason why he got behind Trump was he hoped that he would Trump would bomb Iran. Why he did a 180 on Trump was that he hoped he would bomb Iran. But Lindsey's up for re-election, so he's got to kind of play nice with Trump. Because South Carolina loves Trump, and South Carolina is a big military state, as anybody knows. So you have that. You have Senator Roger Wicker, who's the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, came out and criticized it. Senator John Thune kind of gave, kind of a wait and see approach. Senator John Thune, the majority leader. So there are those folks. Then there are, I guess you could say, some of the other, MAGA-y, America First types like Josh Hawley and Eric Schmidt. They're kind of like straddling the line because they know that they kind of don't want to be explicitly critical of it, but they don't necessarily they're not necessarily crying that the war is over. So I mean, because take into account it was either this. Let's back that a little bit. It's good that Trump decided not to do a full-scale invasion of Iran, because Iran again.
Absolutely, we lost enough full-scale. First off, Americans won't do it.
Yes, we won't do it. Second of all, just think about how big Iran is. Iran is 93 million people. Yeah. It's a massive country. This is not Iraq. Iraq is around 30 million people. Lindsey Graham was talking about Iwo Jima. Well, 10,000 people died in Iwo Jima. But if you just look at the benchmarks, they just see this as a concession. They don't Republicans see this as this failed because it didn't stop Iran's nuclear capacity. And the other thing about it is, ironically enough, Iran learned, hey, we don't need a nuclear weapon. We can just close off the Strait of Hormuz anytime.
Yeah, which they did again today.
They did it again today.
So I'm not sure the war is over.
No, it is.
And the terrible treaty, this surrender that Trump signed at the Palace of Versailles, right? He signed this surrender. In part, it's a reflection of the fact that he lost.
Yes.
Trump isn't giving stuff away because he's a nice man. He's giving it away because the reality is you cannot pretend a target list is a strategy. And right. And so the Lindsey Grahams of the world who think you can bomb your way to get what you want carried the day, and they were proven catastrophically wrong. As by the way, Bibi is being proven catastrophically wrong.
Yes.
Or he's not made Israel safer.
No.
These are terrible decisions by leaders who don't have any strategic vision. And so Congress, who let him do this, after all, the Republicans didn't stop. They were asked to stop it. They didn't stop it. Some of them, as you know, egged it on. I mean, Democrats shouldn't say, oh, this is a terrible deal, you should have signed a better one. They should say, you lost the damn war. That's why you're stuck signing this deal. You shouldn't have done it. The way to get a better deal is through diplomacy, which you threw diplomacy in the reflecting pool and turned it green.
We should not, because Iran's color, ironically enough, Iran's national color, the national
Is
color of
green.
Islam is green. Yes.
Yeah.
I grew up in Southern California. My Persian friends will kill me if I didn't point that out.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's the way that the Democrats should have approached this, which is that Donald Trump declared a war, unilaterally went to war in Iran. Republicans in Congress refused to hold him accountable. Egged him on, refused to restrain him, refused their constitutional duty as Article 1, the first branch in the U.S. Constitution. We're celebrating America 250. We should talk about the Constitution. The first branch of the government. Hell yeah. There's a reason why Madison and Hamilton and all of them made Article 1 about Congress, not the president, because they didn't want a despotic king.
Right.
But the Republicans in Congress let this happen. The House Representatives and the House Republicans, only 4 of them joined Democrats to do a war powers resolution after so many Americans died, after billions of dollars were expended, after American credibility was thrown into the toilet. So that should be the approach, and it looks like it is the approach. And look, let's be completely real. The other part is, and this is really morbid because more than 100 schoolgirls died in Iran. But like, unfortunately, the thing that really Americans cared about was the price of gasoline. And look, gasoline is not going to come down until, some people say, until later next year, like early next year. Like, you're going to still be paying a little bit more at the pump.
Well, I mean, inflation in general there's the problem with energy costs because of this war. The tariffs also drove inflation.
Yes.
I mean, a president. I want to say it properly, because we spend so much time talking about how crazy he is, and just the outrageous individual acts of his that take the news cycles. But he's been now this year. He's been there. We've seen what he can do when he doesn't have people to restrain him, as he did in the first term. And what we know is he's a terrible president. He's an absolutely terrible president.
Right. We can talk. I mean, it's funny. I was talking about this with a friend of mine, and I said that, like, ironically enough, the thing that's causing Trump's approval ratings to go down this time isn't the despotic behavior, though there is despotic behavior. Isn't all that? It's just the fact that he's a bad manager of the economy, and he's a bad manager of foreign policy. And look, Americans, kind of the brutal reckoning that I had after the 2024 election was that Americans will tolerate almost any style of government as long as their standard of living doesn't go down. Americans didn't like the cost of groceries going up or gas going up during the Biden presidency, and they especially don't like the price of gas and groceries going up much more this time. Under a war of choice with Iran and slapping tariffs on an island full of penguins.
Yeah, but Americans, I don't think we would take any form of government that way. Americans didn't believe he was going to be the fascist he is. And the reason I know that is I'm in Chicago. When ICE showed up here and they showed up in Minneapolis, Americans came out of their houses and said, no way. And part of it was, we don't like you picking on our neighbors. But the other part of it was, you do not send your troops in here to tell us how to behave.
Yeah, no. So look, don't tread on me is a real thing. Americans don't like. I mean, we could talk about American military adventurism later, but there's kind of this implicit idea: you don't send troops in jackboots. Look, I grew up in Southern California. It was really surreal to see Marines in Los Angeles, which was so yeah,
terrible. And the other things he's doing that, I mean. And you wrote about this. I mean, just the idea that you would take. I mean, so we've talked about the economy, which he's wrecked. We've talked about foreign policy, where he's damaged America so much. But you have also this enormous public health disaster, with measles outbreaks everywhere. We're about to lose our status. And now he's taken this whole question of programs for that help people with autism and given it to DHS and Kennedy, who is an absolute danger on that topic.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So let's break down, because this is very granular, and I want to explain it and why it's so important to me, and why it's important for anybody who has a loved one with a disability, not just autism. Is that the Department of Education has this office called the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. The point of this is to help people with disabilities find not just jobs, but what's called competitive and integrative employment, which is to say that they're not segregated from non-disabled people, that the jobs are competitive, meaning that they are paid above the minimum wage, because for those who don't know, it's actually still legal to pay people with disabilities below minimum wage. Um, and that it's competitive, that they have the same benefits as everybody else, for a comparable job. And so what's happened is the Department of Education announced this week that they were going to move that office, the office of the OSERS, let's just call it OSERS for now, to the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, like, you could argue, but let's set aside the merits of abolishing the Department of Education for now. Let's just park it for now. Putting it under HHS, you could make the argument that that OSA should go under labor, because it's about finding people jobs. It's about connecting people to the workforce and making sure that, because a lot of people with disabilities actually get disconnected from the workforce after they graduate high school. But putting it under HHS, specifically under Secretary Kennedy, is dangerous when you have a gentleman who has said repeatedly that autism destroys families, says that they're never going to get a job or they're never going to get paid taxes. If you start from that baseline that autism destroys families, then you are going to have this lower expectation and this lower baseline, and you're not going to be as incentivized to help these people find jobs. And look, I've been in, and I should put something really clear. Some of the best states that have gotten rid of sub-minimum wage labor and that are actually trying to help people with disabilities are Republican states. And why does that? And that makes sense, because if you're a Republican, you want people to find jobs. You want people to be competitive. Texas has a really good competitive integrated program. They got rid of some minimum wage labor. Georgia, Governor Brian Kemp did it. Governor Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, when he was governor of Virginia, and then Governor Henry McMaster in South Carolina have all gotten rid of some minimum wage labor.
Yep.
But if you don't have the federal support to get these students from high school or college, community college, and get them connected to employers because you believe that they are patients, that, which is what Senator Andy Kim said to Secretary Kennedy, it's gonna lead to this disconnect because you don't see them as people who can work.
So what was their rationale? Why did they decide to do this?
First off, they want to get rid of the Department of Education, even though you need an act of Congress. But the argument is that that there are already a lot of disability services in the Department of Health and Human Services. The Administration for Children and Families, the Administration for Community Living. Again, you could make the argument. If you wanted to make the argument that we should get rid of the Department of Education, again, I would say put it under the Department of Labor. But
yes, all right. So that's horrible.
Yes.
And dangerous. And another reason why he's a terrible president. But I want to ask you again to go back to Congress and the good Republicans there didn't stop the war and didn't stop the deficiency and didn't stop the impoundments and any of that stuff that was taking their rights away. Isn't it Congress also who structures the government?
It is.
Is it up to the president to say this function doesn't belong in one department and belongs in another? He doesn't get to reorganize by himself.
He doesn't get to reorganize it. And I should say that the individuals, the president who signed the three presidents who signed the ADA, the original 1976 version, was President Gerald Ford. The one who signed the reauthorization in 1990, the year that I was born, was President George H.W. Bush. The president who signed the most recent authorization was George W. Bush. And the IDEA statute says specifically that OSERS has to be housed in the Department of Education.
Right. So again, this is contempt for the law, and undoubtedly they'll be sued. But what we've learned is the courts have done a remarkable job, actually, but they're slow. They're deliberate.
They are.
And so these guys throw their wrecking ball in. They'd like destroy the White House. And we sue and we stop them from like building their ballroom or whatever it is. But they are very fast and they wreck things. I'd like them to build one decent thing. To do one decent thing.
Yeah,
we'll let them do that instead. But it's just incredible.
Yeah, but like, think about it this way. Right now is June, so school's letting out. But if you're a parent with a disability, if you're a parent of a child with a disability, let alone if you're a parent who's disabled yourself and has a child with a disability, because a lot of them are hereditary, think about the amount of confusion going into the next school year. Do I consult with the Department of Health and Human Services? Do I go to the Department of Ed? If you're an administrator, again,
school districts are confused too.
School districts are completely they don't know who to go to. They don't know who to contact. And so it creates chaos for a lot of these, for a lot of students. And we should also say that during Doge and during Elon Musk's reign of terror, like they completely gutted the Office of Civil Rights. So, a lot of people were saying, a lot of people pointed out that as part of this agreement, the Office of Civil Rights is going to the Department of Justice. Well, the Office of Civil Rights was already gutted. So I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that office was already gone. So it's just one more thing where parents don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's one thing where, again, Congress is abdicating its duty.
Totally.
About
Totally
this
looking
is
the other way.
And I should say, sorry, one last thing. The person who's in charge of the Committee for Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions is Senator Bill Cassidy. Senator, you lost your primary. You can hold hearings on this. So
Yeah, he should. That you said the House is out. When does the House come back?
House comes back next week. So.
And what do you expect when they come back and we have signed away this surrender deal? It's still going to be in the news because they're supposedly going to be negotiating the next. But by the way, I'm sorry, I'm going to back up. Who's doing the negotiating? Is it J.D. Vance? Is it the dynamic duo of Witkoff and Kushner again?
Yeah.
Is it God forbid the State Department? I mean, who is in negotiating for America?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I mean, it looks like the face of this is Vice President Vance, which is interesting to me because historically this is done on the Secretary of State level. Again, this is a memorandum of understanding. This is just saying, hey, we're beginning the process. This is our mutual understanding. It's not an actual signed treaty or anything like that.
Well, but it's weird because they call it an MOA, but it does obligate us to, for instance, free up funds for them.
Correct.
It does actually have obligations, not in it. So so once again, they give things that are misleading.
Correct. Yes. So it's an MOU, but yeah. I mean, I think that the question is like there doesn't seem to be one designated person because we saw that Secretary Rubio was with the president at the G7 with the president, but we also saw that in France, which I was shocked because for those who don't know, Giorgia Meloni is not a liberal in Italy. She's from the hard right party, but talk about that later. And then on top of that, I think that you have the vice president who's really selling the deal. He was on Fox and Friends this morning. He had the press conference earlier this week. So it doesn't look like there's one point person, but we'll see.
Chaos. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens when the House returns and this house of cards continues to collapse. Hey, we've run out of time. It went by too fast. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You have a great day.
And everybody's watching, go to The Independent, see this great work. It's fabulous coverage of what's going on.
Thanks so much, Edwin.
Talk to you soon.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Okay, there are things that make me happy on the radio, and one of them is when I get joined by the inspiring, effective, and indefatigable leader of the North Carolina Dems, Anderson Clayton. Anderson, welcome back.
Thanks for having us, Edwin. You're too kind to us always, but thank you for that introduction.
So what's going on in North Carolina?
We're pulling full steam ahead right now, trying to make sure that we keep a Republican out of the U.S. Senate in North Carolina. And Roy Cooper has been campaigning across the state. He's doing right now a Make Stuff Cost Less tour. And for folks asking what the simplified message that Democrats are trying to put out this year, I think Roy Cooper's got a good one for them. And also making sure that we're getting out the state, across the state for our state Supreme Court race with Justice Anita Earls, because we have a lot of opportunities in North Carolina to make gains to take back seats on the ballot that we're going to need for years to come in the state.
And, you will never, I know this about you, you will never take a single vote for granted. But it looks like you are doing a fabulous job. I mean, the pollsters and the folks who rate Democrat chances, and Republican chances say Roy Cooper looks pretty good right now.
Well, you got to give that credit to the good old man Roy Cooper himself, for someone who's been in public service in North Carolina for 45 years in this state. I mean, from the state Senate now to the U.S. Senate, he's going to have one heck of a legacy in North Carolina, being somebody that's always stood up against Republicans who are trying to be too extreme for the state of North Carolina. And that's what we're finding right now. I mean, people that are trying to gut health insurance and coverage for people across our state, over 1 million people are being impacted right now by what Republicans passed last year with the sort of Trump's big, beautiful bill or whatnot. And we're seeing those effects. And I just think that folks right now are feeling it in their pocketbooks too, especially.
Oh my gosh, the impact of that terrible legislation, the impact of the illegal tariffs, the impact of his illegal war, all of those are piling up on ordinary Americans.
No, you're right. But you're right about we're not taking one single vote for granted. I just got done. My cell phone service might be a little bit spotty, but I'm out here today in Catawba County. We're out here canvassing with Park Inglefield, who's a 31-year-old woman who's running to take on a 75-year-old Republican incumbent in my state legislature right now. And she's somebody who's been on the ground and is just a good organizer. And we've got those folks in all 170 legislative seats across the state in North Carolina. And it just goes to show how serious I think grassroots organizers and volunteers have taken the charge to make sure that we're contesting every single race that we possibly can on a ballot in 2026, because you never know where gains are going to happen, especially in a state like North Carolina.
Well, you know they're not going to happen where you don't have a candidate and you're not asking people to vote for you, for sure. So
Amen.
what you do,
Amen.
yeah. So forgive me, I don't have the county map of North Carolina in my head. Where is Catawba County?
It's in the western part of the state. So when you're looking at
so you're in the mountains?
In the mountains where Hurricane Helene and when we saw sort of a torrential downpour of some of the worst natural disasters in 2024, when we saw Hurricane Helene come through and ravage western North Carolina. Sort of that Catawba County was also involved in that, and in that mix of those 35 counties that were affected by that.
Hasn't that traditionally been Republican turf?
Western North Carolina for the last few decades has definitely been Republican leaning, and I think that it's just important for Democrats, right, to show up everywhere that we can. And we've got candidates this year, and I think places this year that Republicans have typically held that are more willing to listen to our party than they ever have been before because of what's happening from Trump's chaos.
Yeah, and is there a state legislative gerrymander you have to overcome?
North Carolina is the most gerrymandered state in the country, and so we've got an uphill battle, which is why we're focused on our state Supreme Court race this year, because we know that when Democrats held the state Supreme Court in North Carolina, we repealed partisan and racial gerrymandering and made it illegal to do it. And a Republican state Supreme Court came back in 2023 and reversed that court's decision, made partisan and racial gerrymandering legal again, and so we have the most gerrymandered congressional maps in the state right now and state legislative maps in the country right now.
Okay. But you do not sound daunted by this.
I think that Democrats in North Carolina have had a plan, and I know that, and when I've talked your ear off about it before, but just for folks listening to this who don't know, North Carolina has a lot of power to give back to the nation when we're thinking about the future of the Democratic Party here. And one of the things that we've been really focused on is taking back our courts, and it's why I talk a lot about our Supreme Court Justice Anita Earls, who's going to be on the ballot this year, because we completed step one of taking back our courts in 2024. We reelected a Democratic Supreme Court Justice with Allison Riggs. We've got to do the same thing again in 26. And in 2028, I've got 3 Republican seats that will be up on the North Carolina State Supreme Court, and we can repeal partisan racial gerrymandering again before we get to 2030 into a new census. And I think that's really important, because folks right now are looking at, congressional leadership in the South and Black Democrats all across the South that are losing that congressional representation because of the fact that we saw the Supreme Court gut parts of the Voting Rights Amendment, right? And just thinking about how how that's going to impact our ability to have congressional power again. And North Carolina is definitely a state where we're looking at over the next 2 cycles being able to give back at least 4 or 5 of those seats to the Democratic Party. And we fully expect those to be in some majority districts that we want to make sure we've got that leadership again in. And one of those being NC01, where we've got Don Davis's seat that's up this year, which is a historically congressional district that's always been a majority-minority district, and one that Republicans have tried to gerrymander out. One of the last black male Democrats that I've got right now in Congress from North Carolina. So we're trying to protect his seat this year, but we've got a plan to end gerrymandering in North Carolina altogether. And so we've got some hard cycles that we're going to go through, but I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I know Republicans do too.
All right, if you're listening to this, if you're listening to Anderson Clayton talk about how North Carolina is moving in the right direction and can contribute to the whole country. Look, I know you guys who are listening reached into your wallets and helped when this was the fight we were having in Wisconsin. So, look up NC Dems, the North Carolina Dems online. It's not hard to find them, and maybe do the same thing. Help share the wealth here. It's going to help. It's really going to help. Sorry about that.
I think the best bang for your buck you'll get is in the state of North Carolina this year, because we've got the most important U.S. Senate race in the country. And then what I just said about our state Supreme Court, I mean, the opportunities are endless in the South, and we have to, Anita Earls, the justice that I was talking about, she's got a really great saying. She tells people that she was from an era of the civil rights movement where everybody across the country leaned into their pockets to help free the South. And we've got to be able to do that again this year. And so that's something that I feel like is really motivating for a lot of people.
Anderson, I talked to one of your colleagues, the Democratic chair in Indiana, and she said to me, she gets asked to speak a lot. And she says, well, I'll say a few words, Republican words. And then she stands up in front of the audience and says Doge and Iran and Medicare cuts. And she gets cheered all over the state for her few Republican words. Have I lost you?
Oh, no, I'm here.
In there. Okay. So I just, I think they have made themselves not popular, and the good Roy Cooper is doing a great job, but he's helped by a guy named Michael Whatley. I mean, right? They have managed to make themselves, the Republicans. Americans are waking up to how damaging they are.
I mean, I think Republicans are sinking themselves, in every way. I think you're right, because it's hard right now to see what they're doing is actually trying to help fulfill the campaign promises that they ran on. And I think that Donald Trump, especially, his main campaign focus was lowering prices for people. And I was just out knocking doors today, and folks were talking to me about the main issues that they had were housing affordability, being able to afford rent while they have it. And then also I talked to a lot of unaffiliated, 27 to 30-year-olds who were living at home with their parents still, honestly, because they were like, I cannot afford to live on my own right now and be able to make ends meet. And I think that's the reality of just so many people, especially that missing middle of voters that we're not seeing come to the polls right now, because we're not talking about a lot of those issues. And I think the Democrats have really flipped the script on that this year. And that's what we see Roy Cooper talking about. That's what we see John Ossoff talking about. That's what we see a lot of the Sherrod Brown right in Ohio, honestly. I just think that the candidates that are really focusing on a message of what voters need to hear, because they also know that that's what voters want our government to actually focus on. And Michael Whatley is running against Roy Cooper. And for those of you that don't know him, Michael Whatley was one of the lawyers that was a proponent of the Keystone XL pipeline that was trying to take away indigenous land, and also is an oil lobbyist. And so not necessarily somebody that I want to take on big corporations and special interest groups in Washington, D.C. D.C. that already have too much hold and power in that office already, from what I can tell, at least by what we've seen coming out of the Trump administration. You know, billionaires have gotten their fair share and their fair cut from all of this. I think it's finally time that the average person did too, and that's what I think we're going to see when we send Roy Cooper to the U.S. Senate.
So let's zoom out for a second. When you look at how Americans feel about political parties, they don't love our party, Anderson. They don't. They just don't. The brand has been tarnished from years of Republican smears and, frankly, some of our own mistakes. And now we're in the process in this primary cycle of changing what we talk about, what we mean to people, and it's a change. From my perspective, it's a change from the era of let's make a deal in Congress, like that's what we're going there to do, to let's get stuff done for people. And there's also a generational change happening at the same time. So I wonder if you could talk about where you see the future of the Democratic Party. Who are we? When the country says, well, we don't know who they are, you know, we think they only care about bathrooms, right? Because the Republicans say weird stuff about us. Who are the Democrats, and how do we tell people this and get this message out?
You know, the first framework that came to my mind is that we're your neighbors, because I think that what Democrats right now, at least what we're doing in North Carolina and what I see across the state, is that Democrats are really trying to rebuild community, and they're trying to. I was just talking to a guy earlier today who said that he was a precinct chair of mine, and he said one of the things that he had focused on was getting together like-minded people in his network and his neighborhood, and then the next thing they were going to do is they were going to start inviting folks that disagreed with them, that were unaffiliated, that were more moderate Republicans, and he said that he wanted to sort of bring in a group of people who could have a discussion about something and not hate each other when they got done with it. And I think all across the country right now, and what we're seeing is that the everyday American wants somebody who's going to speak to their needs and their interests and honestly want to solve problems, because we have seen government for so long be so inefficient by not solving the actual problem that's at hand. And instead of solving a problem, they're making everything about politics. And I think that we want problem solvers in office. And I always like to say that, you know, we don't need more politicians, we need more public servants. And I think that that's what we're finally starting to see from a lot of the folks that are running, and also a lot of, to your point, the new generation of politics. They're people that they just really care about their communities rather than the flashy showiness of it. And there was actually a cool study done recently about young people, and they asked a survey of young folks, like, who would you want your life to be modeled around? And they gave like a series of influencers and celebrities, and a lot of young people, majority of the young folks that took the survey had said that actually they wanted their lives to be more private, that they didn't actually claim, they didn't want to be a celebrity, they didn't want that sort of fame. And I think it's reflective right now of how much we have made politics about popularity and also about like celebrityism in some way, instead of about what it's actually meant to be. You know, public service is meant to be hard. It's not supposed to be something that's easy. And I think so much we've gotten away from that point, and people want to see folks that just care about them again in office.
Do the work and do the work. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I always thought the politicians I loved struck me as ambitious, not to be, but ambitious to do, you know, right. They didn't want the title. They wanted the impact.
Yeah, AOC, I think, said it recently on a panel that she did, right? She was David Axelrod. She was talking about how she said that, you know, it's funny to her that people think that she's ambitious for a title, and she said, no, I'm ambitious for a cause. Like I want to do something. And then I thought that was the best thing that she could have ever said. And it was something that I always think about in this job too, is that it's not about like, you don't have a title doesn't give you purpose, you know, only you can do that. And I think that's what I'm hoping the average person across America is finding out right now too about their power in politics, is that, you know, you have a lot of purpose, and that's what Republicans right now are afraid of, is folks recognizing it.
Yeah. I mean, across the country, Democrats or you know, people who are on our side but who aren't doing the work that you're doing, are afraid that the president is going to try and cheat. And, I think he might try and cheat, but I think overwhelming turnout makes it impossible for him to get away with it. And I think about Hungary. That wasn't a free and fair election, and yet the people won it.
Well, and also just to make some listeners feel better, most of every battleground state that decides a presidential election, the elections are controlled by Democrats. And so Democrats care about free and fair elections and making sure that ballots that are properly cast are also properly counted. And so the state that right now you should be concerned with is North Carolina, because we are one of the only battleground states where Republicans do control our elections. And we have gone through a Republican election denialism before in 2024 when Republicans tried to come in and retroactively throw out 68,000 ballots from the 2024 election.
Court race. Yeah.
And so I want folks to walk away feeling good that North Carolina has beat Republican extremism and election denialism before, and we will do it again in 26 if we have to, and in 28 as well. But we cannot properly count any vote that's not cast. And I want to make sure that folks feel good about going to a ballot box this year, because I want to flood the zone, y'all, with people and make sure that this administration hears us on the ground.
Anderson, the way you talk about the work that you do, it is gonna. I want to play this conversation to people in 50 states, whether they have any connection in North Carolina or not, because it gives people the kind of focus, energy, and hope they need to get through this cycle and to see the other side of this moment in our history.
I think the South is really. This sounds weird, but I think we were really well prepared to go through another Trump administration because we have been through Project 2025 for the last 65 years here in the South. And in some ways we are used to, right, Republicans trying to suppress the vote, Republicans trying to defund education, Republicans trying to disenfranchise voters and target specific groups of people. And I think that what we have managed to do here in North Carolina, and also I'm hoping across the South, is create partnerships with organizations and good civic-minded groups that care about just the enfranchisement of being able to vote. And something that we're working on is making sure that we've got the voter protection operation in place too, because we fully know that Donald Trump and this federal government are going to send people to polling locations this year, that we're going to have ICE at certain places in North Carolina, and we already have right throughout this year. So we're making plans and we're here to execute. And I think that the reality of that is just making sure that you have and that you're involved with those plans, because the number one way to make you feel better when you're in the chaos right now is to put your hand on something. And so if you're in North Carolina, I hope you're getting involved by going to ncdp.org. But if you're in another state, I hope that you are getting involved with a local group somewhere around you that's, helping poll watch or do something outside of polling locations, or also you're helping out a candidate this cycle, that you're doing something and that you're looking locally to do it, because the most amount of impact that you're going to have is at the local level this year.
Yes. And Republicans figured that out decades ago, and they've been weaponizing their local power against us, from school boards to governor's offices in every state, and certainly in the way they have gerrymandered the state legislatures. So, Anderson, I couldn't agree with you more. If we win back the states, if we focus on or even just, mayors. If we focus on this, we rebuild community, and strong communities are immune to the kind of lying, divisive nonsense, because we see in our daily lives what it means. So focus where you are.
We also rebuild a bench for our party, right? We want to make sure that the folks that are going up to a state legislature understand what cities are having to go through right now with healthcare cuts, and that they know what their budgets look like, and that we want people that are going to Congress to have understood what it's like to have been in a state legislature. And I think the experience of being able to know what it's like at a local level to do a lot with a little is also really important for some of the folks right now in Congress that, we could consider are wasting taxpayer dollars on unnecessary wars and fights that they don't actually need to have right now. And I think that a lot of local governments would be able to come in and shape up a congressional budget any day of their lives too, just because it's really hard right now on the ground to do what they need to do.
Well, okay. So I was just going to bring you right back to the beginning of our conversation, because for all of those reasons, that experience, that visibility into what's happening on the ground in a place, Roy Cooper is going to be a terrific United States Senator.
Yeah, I mean, he's also going to put the importance. One thing that we've seen this year across the state is that Governor Cooper has put an extreme amount of emphasis on our state Supreme Court as well, because he understands what it's like to have unfriendly courts when you're a governor. Like, our state legislature stripped more powers away from Roy Cooper as governor in North Carolina than they did any other Democratic governor in state history. And part of that was because Roy Cooper was such a successful governor in North Carolina. And so I think that what we know is that Republicans are willing to wield power in every way, shape, and form in order to keep it, and Democrats have got to have control of the levers of power that are able to actually equalize it. And so for us, it is focusing on the courts. It's focusing on our congressional races this year. We have two really important congressional seats, one that we've got to hold in NC01 with Don Davis, and then also NC11 with Jamie Ager. Jamie Ager is a farmer. He runs Hickory Nut Gap Farms out in Asheville in western North Carolina, and he is somebody who is just an incredible candidate that we've got this year, who, to your point earlier, Edwin, about the illegal tariffs, I mean, he is just seeing how much the small farmers and also the beef industry in general this year has been ravaged by tariffs all across our state and all across the country.
Yep. Well, Anderson, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with those of us, by the Great Lakes while you're in those beautiful mountains. And for the work that you're doing every day. Just it's lifting people in North Carolina, but it's lifting people all over the country.
Well, look, thank you for taking some time to highlight it. North Carolina is going to give some real power back to the nation, and I'm excited about it this year. We're going to make sure we get Roy Cooper over the line and Anita Earls, too. And if you're out there, go to ncdp.org. Get involved with us today.
I think that is a brilliant idea. Thanks, Anderson. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Evan.
Bye. Bye. All right, everybody, we're going to take a break, and your calls when we come back.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid, on WCPT 820.
Okay, folks, 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. I want to hear from you, and let's start with Jim.
Hi, Edwin. Another insane week. But Trump pointed out again succinctly when he said, we have more atomic bombs than Russia, and Russia's in second place, and China's in third place, but they're creeping up on us with atomic bombs. Now, this is coming from the President of the United States. And all I can think back to is Biden, who got 81 million Democratic votes, the highest in history. When he took the podium, he said, I'm a president for everybody in the United States, even the people that didn't vote for me. I'm going to look out for them anyway. Now, that's the kind of rhetoric that I expect from an American president. I don't know about you, but that's the kind of rhetoric I expect. But they think the thing that's insane about this is they think they can actually get away with a one-party rule. This Project 2025 and these other insane things, and like they're going to get away with this, and like we're all going to be zombied to the point where we don't realize that we actually have, favorable outcomes in the elections. And all I can say is, if they think that this SAVE Act is absolutely preposterous, you imagine going into the voting booth, you've got your birth certificate, your passport, your DNA, your ancestry. I mean, come on. I mean, what is this? I mean, what is this? The final checkout point? I mean, this is absolutely insane. And just to entertain it is absurd. But all I can say is I sleep better at night when I know we got more atomic bombs than Russia, and Russia has more atomic bombs than China, and but they're coming up fast with atomic bombs. So, I mean, this rhetoric is insane. Anyway, Edwin, great show as usual, and have a great week, Edwin. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. It's not just the rhetoric; it's insane. The president's insane. He's been a terrible president, and now he wants to be a terrible dictator. But as you heard from Anderson, in North Carolina, and people like her around the country, we're not going to let it happen. We aren't. That's just how it's going to be. Dave.
Hey, Edwin. Couple of things, Brad. Like they were talking about when Trump basically signed the surrender form in Versailles, and saying what a town, because that's where in 1918 where the Germans had to sign to the off, for the surrender of World War One, basically to the French and stuff. But another thing, talk about a vindictive guy. When Hitler rolled over Paris in 1940, he had that train car that they had assigned that original surrender back in 1918. He had that brought right back to Versailles, to the same spot, and made the French sign that armistice there. And after that was done, he burned that car.
Yeah.
And sound like somebody we know, vindictive.
Yeah.
And that last time seen a leader of us get played like Trump got played by the Iranians is, if you recall back at the end of the Iraqi war, when they negotiated with Schwarzkopf, can we have the helicopters and stuff like that, for that, they had the no-fly zones or free for whatever, and then he says, yeah, okay, we'll let you have the helicopters. And it was, about a week or so later, they're flying out, they were slaughtering these Kurds and that. And we had told them Kurds the same thing we told those Iranian students, we got your back, And then they had them pictures of those Kurds kneeling in front of those big, long trenches, graves they had to dig for themselves, and it looked reminiscent from them World War II scenes, like when the Nazis would kill either the Polish or the Jewish ones over the mass graves. Same thing, so it's
Yep.
And why would they ever believe and trust us, the Kurds? We tell them we got you.
No one in the world anymore. The people who were who he signed up with, they just, he hasn't delivered anything for any of them except grief.
Yeah.
The Saudis, the Israelis, certainly not anyone in Europe. He didn't consult with our allies in Japan before he closed the strait, hurt their economy. Everybody knows he is he is selfish and dangerous, and no one. And a very good Chicago businessman, his name was Henry Crown, once said, "You cannot make a good deal with a bad partner." And the whole world understands Donald Trump is a bad partner now.
Yeah. Hey, Edward, in closing with this one, like with the Juneteenth yesterday, or the other day when they opened up the Obama's center that time, when they had all those presidents and stuff. Yep. And do you realize on the 17th of, it was a 5-year anniversary when President Joe Biden signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act into law, creating the first new national holiday since the establishment of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It would have been kind of nice, the way Biden's been getting beat up by Trump and his minions, and then even some of our own people beating up on on Biden.
On Joe.
If when President Obama was giving them his flowers, he could have just threw that in there and said, "Oh, by the way, tomorrow, guys, this man, President Joe Biden, he signed this law into act, so you got a holiday from it." He should have gave him his flowers. The man, you could see like with that when he went looking for his granddaughter thing.
Good point, Dave. It's a good point.
Yeah. Anyway, have a good one, Edwin.
I appreciate it. You too.
Be well.
Yep. All right, Paul. How are things on the West Coast on this solstice?
Well, Edwin, as we come upon the 250th anniversary of our independence, I was just thinking, as you and Jim were talking, whereas we've noted on this program that Trump has violated almost all of the grievances in the Declaration of Independence, our independence from King George III, who I think for you to recall was insane. And so is Donald Trump. So history does, in fact, kind of repeat itself. But, here's the thing. What Jim said, Trump bragging that we have more nukes and Russia is second and China is third. It's just that kind of stupid remark that has, and the way this Iran conflict is turning out, is what has put the United States, this along with the Iraq War from the beginning of the 21st century here, in a compromised position in terms of credibility and negotiation. I think probably for about 40 years. I don't see when you're going to say, and I want to remind you that when this started, you and I had a little difference of opinion about who was the bad actor in the Middle East. That Iran's a bad actor. Well, that's a relative term, and it also is a kind of a what have you done for me lately type of comparison, because the bad actors in the Middle East right now are the United States and Israel. There's no question. That's what got us into this position. And when you can't negotiate, the way this has turned out, and I've been telling people this week, to pony up $325 billion from the other states, they have to do that. This costs them. And the probably close to $100 billion in military expenses that we've had, and not only that, the increase in prices that the American people and the worldwide the people have had to pay for the closing of the strait. This is all north of $500 billion, maybe worldwide approaching $1 trillion. All I can think of is it is really not a negotiating starter to say, because, war is not about military might. You know that. It's about interests, which are ultimately reduced to economics. And it's not a starter to say, hey, we don't want you to have something that we have lots of. Okay. My inclination is to, remember on Holy Grail with the Frenchman in the castle said, "I fought in your direction, Monsieur Sir Arthur King," right? Yeah. That's what the Iranians did. That's what the Iranians did, because the thing to do is if you're to say you don't want me to have something, and then, of course, Trump always and Vance and Hegseth have this Godfather type of negotiation, which is I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. This paper is either going to have your signature or your brains on it. That just doesn't play. And if this is what we were going to do, if this much expense, a long time, as you said, we were talking with Iran. We could have just said, hey, how much you got there of uranium? 450 kilograms? How about we buy it from you? We'll just come and pick it up and give you
for that, Paul. There's precedent for that. After the fall of the Soviet Union, we spent a lot of money to gain control of the nuclear scientists and to actually get rid of some of the nukes in the countries, that were part of the Soviet Union. So, remember, Ukraine agreed to give up its nukes if we would protect it from Russia. Oh, gee whiz.
Yes, and that's what I was going to. That was my next point. Is that Ukraine got empty promises. They got no interest back up. And now both Russia, because the Ukrainian nukes were taken to Russia for disassembly, supposedly, and both Russia and the United States, who were signatories to that Budapest memorandum, have both turned their backs on Ukraine. At this point, Trump has turned his back on Ukraine. And so
he has, but it looks like Congress is moving to push for more support for them finally, which is great.
Well, okay, but you know what? From Iran's point of view, Edwin, they still have their uranium. They would be doggedly trying to finish that program, and maybe they will get Russia or China to help them, because I don't honestly think that they want a nuke for offensive purposes. That's the fear. They want it for security, because look, who wouldn't? And the way
I'm not with you on that. I'm not with you on that. Iran, I don't think Iran should have a nuke. I think Iran, we gave them a huge new weapon in control of the Straits of Hormuz, which they closed again today. They have been funding, and they killed Americans. They funded armies all around the region to cause chaos. This regime is a bad news.
Okay, but Edwin, I'm not saying I want to have them to have a nuke, but I'm sorry, but the type of negotiations that they have been we presented with them doesn't give them much,
Look, if the only thing standing between them and getting a nuke is the brilliant negotiating of J.D. Vance, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff, they're going to have a huge arsenal. So God help us.
Well, yeah, and look at Vance falling out NATO. I mean, he's an idiot. I have not heard an intelligent word come out of J.D. Vance's mouth. He sounds more like Pete Hegseth. This guy's a Yale law grad. Give me a break. Jesus. He's an idiot. He's a complete idiot. He sounds like exactly the person that comes from Hillbilly Elegy. That's I didn't think he was that way, but I thought, oh, he escaped that? No, he didn't. He's an idiot. He's a complete moron, and he's balling out. He doesn't know how to make friends.
Well, about that, hang on one second, because I just want to go back to what you said about that. When I was a young man, I lived in those mountains in Appalachia. I spent 6 months there, and I found the people there to be really interesting, really hardworking, fully creative, not the people that J.D. Vance mocked in that book.
Right. But J.D. Vance is not from there. He's from basically
so he decided to mock those
Cincinnati.
people and pretend he was there. And I'm sorry, I got no patience for that. Yeah. Paul, I got a couple others I want to let in here before we go. So thank you.
Okay, take care.
You bet. All right, Max, we were just talking North Carolina, and you're there.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So I love, I'm from California. The company I worked for transferred me out here. But I work all over the East Coast right now. So I travel up and down and Europe. And next year I'll be going back to Europe again. I love it over there. And when you get people, the reason I brought that up is because when you get people are talking about people, you know what? Everywhere you go, people are the same. And when we're talking about the Iran and how crazy these people are, they're not crazy. I actually know quite a few of them. Probably around 30 years ago, I used to work with quite a few people from there that just actually, maybe about 35 years ago, when they, actually probably even further than that, when the Shah got kicked out of there, and a lot of Iranians left because they had a lot of wealth.
Yourself, man. You are dating yourself. That was definitely more than 30 years ago, 1979.
Yeah. Okay, so anyway, it was about that time, and I was in college, and there were actually a lot of young kids from Iran that supported the Shah. But the only thing about it, when you really read about the Shah was really he had that prison over there. He was torturing people over there. He was torturing people that wanted, like me, I would be tortured. And I never told you, but my grandfather, he fought in World War II, but his father and his grandfather and his father, so that would be my grandfather's father and grandfather actually were executed for standing up to the government in a different country. I'm not going to say where. Okay, but this is the thing, is that basically you as a human being has rights. You have them in your heart. And I think it said that somewhere in our Constitution or something like that. It doesn't, the thing is that you're born with them, and you want to have freedom.
Inalienable. They cannot be taken away.
Well, what the Shah was doing is that if he wanted those rights, you know what he's going to do? He's going to take you inside that prison that they had down there that I think the English or the French built, and they would torture you and stuff and find out who else had those thoughts, and then they would execute you, and then they would get those people and execute them. That's what the Shah was doing.
Let me interrupt for 1 second. I think your point is, and I agree with it, that while the Shah's government, maybe the current government in Iran, are really terrible, the people are great. The people are great, and
People
they
are
don't
always
deserve the
great.
government they have. Yeah.
Just like our government, but you know what? I have quite a few books of Jimmy Carter, who every time I used to go down to Georgia, I've been to where he's buried at, but every time I would go to Georgia, I actually wanted to go to his house and meet him, but I always had to go somewhere else, and because he used to have like Sunday prayer, this 20 years ago or so, so. But I never had a chance to, and I love reading his books. And the thing is that a lot of people don't know that I think it's East Seymour. You could put that in there, and 780,000 human beings were executed with bombs that Jimmy Carter, maybe it went into Ronald Reagan, supplied the Indonesian to bomb East Timor so they could steal their gas. This is the same thing we're doing to the people in Gaza. The EP or whoever, they want to take their natural gas that they have in Gaza. It's a minimum of $1.4 trillion, and they're willing to kill everyone there for it, so they can make trillions of dollars. Because I think the gas itself is a minimum of $500 billion, but once you ship it and sell it to the people, it's somewhere like $10 trillion. And for $10 trillion, they want to kill these people because they don't really even know them. But and the same thing we hear President Bush Trump. We hear Trump say that, you know what, we're going to keep half of the gas and they're going to keep the other half because he thought that they were going to beat the people in Iran. But the thing about it is that we need change here in America. And in order for us to get the change in America, the stealing of other people's property has to end. In the United States, you get locked up for that.
Yeah, Max, I agree with you, but I'm going to move on because I got a couple other callers.
Okay, thank you for taking my call, and I'm glad you've been to the Blue Ridge. Everybody needs to go there.
You bet. Thank you. All right, we're going to go to Greg and then Tim, and I think that's what I have the time for. So, Greg, you're next, and we're going to save time for Tim.
Yeah, hi, Edwin. Yeah, it's Greg. Thanks for taking my call today. Enjoy your show as always. My reason for calling today is, what I heard when, earlier in the day that the Strait of Hormuz has been closed today, and the reason cited was that there was attacks again by Israel on Lebanon. And here would be my solution if I had, say, I would have the United States Congress look into this and then vote to halt all, and I make that capital ALL, all aid from the United States to Israel for 30 days, starting today. No chance of reversing that for 30 days. And let them mull over in that 30 days. What they'll probably do is they'll probably start using nukes because that's what I see out of them. They'll probably nuke Iraq or Iran, I should say, or Lebanon. I know they want that land. That's what they really want. They want that land, and they're saying, oh, we want it for protection. I'm not anti-Semitic, and I'm going to repeat that. But what I hate more than anything is we have two nostrils in our nose, and what Israel's doing, they grab us by those nostrils and they lead us where they want us to go. And I can't stand that they are able to do that to us. They have destroyed. They've caused us the loss of the last election to Trump, and because of them, our democracy and our economy are being destroyed, all because of what Netanyahu was allowed to do. And that's my point. Let's interrupt them for 30 days.
Greg, I hear you loud and clear, and I don't agree with it completely. And I just wanted to be clear. I know that this is not about Jews, and that you are not saying things about Jewish people. I get that, and I want to be sure that I say that out loud. But the decisions that we make in the United States are our own decisions. Israel is a little country. They suffered a lot on October 7th, and then the violence afterwards that Netanyahu has brought is unconscionable, no question. That he doesn't bring us to war in Iran. That's our decision. That's on Donald Trump. We are the biggest, most powerful country in the world. And when we decide to go to war, that is nobody else's fault. That's us. We decide. We have to own that. And you know what I mean? That Donald Trump owns that, not anybody else. No matter whose side we pretended to be on for a while, that's us. And people who didn't vote or voted or thought Democrats were bad on this issue and gave us Donald Trump and got worse for them, this is on us again. We have to learn to be tougher about the way we look at the world, and we have to learn to take the responsibility ourselves so that we make better decisions. I'm not disagreeing with you about Bibi. I think he's a terrible bad actor. Totally get it. I'm not justifying the level of slaughter that happened in response to October 6th. I think it was too big and the indiscriminate, and too many innocent people are dead. And you know what we need in that part of the world, which we do not have, there or here? People who want to make peace. We are desperate for peacemakers. Anyway, Greg, as always, I appreciate your call. I'm going to go to Tim because we are running up against the clock. Tim.
It's Ken.
Okay.
Ken from
Ken.
Indiana. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So my notes are Tim.
How you doing? No, it's Ken. I'm from Northwest Indiana. By the way, we consider ourselves more part of Chicagoland than we are Indiana because it's a lot of Illinoisans. They own most of the property along the lake, people from Chicago. So we are extension of Chicagoland. That's what they call us. But we know more about your politics than we do our own state. But my point or my statement was about the military. This whole thing is dangly keys. When you have a little toddler who has something and you want to take it from them, you dangle something so that they want that object, and then you take the knife or whatever away from them. And that's what Trump and Republicans are doing. All this, the war, the pool, everything is all, his name on the building is all dangly keys. So you have to watch the money mainly because that's what they're about. And I think this war is fake because Putin is in bed with the Iranians. So I think Trump is taking his marching orders from Putin. So why are we going over there? They're spending all our ammunition over there and blowing up. Oh, we don't have any more bombs. So they have to make new bombs. So where are all those military complexes? They're down in the south. They're making the munitions. And so it's a cycle. It's like every Republican that gets in office does that. They push this money up to the top. We go into a war. We usually end up with a recession or a depression, and that's a constant cycle. And it's been like that my whole life, almost since Reagan. Every Republican, it's the same thing, and they figured this out, and that's what they want to do. And I think that's the problem. Until we break that cycle, it's going to continue. Because look what happened with the war. Putin's, his blockade on his oil was lifted. So he benefited, and I think that some way with that $300 million or whatever, I think somehow Trump's going to get his pocket, and the Iranians won, and it's shameful. I mean, that's what's going on. I think it's treasonous.
Well, that's going to be, I guess, our last word for today is going to be treason. But look, for the rest of you, for all of us, whatever you think of Donald Trump, whatever you think of this do-nothing complicit Congress, whatever you think of the mess that they have made of this world of ours, it is our world. And we can do something about it. We can. Americans have overcome and overcome and overcome. We took this promise that was just, a line in a Declaration of Independence, and we said, we are going to make it real. We're going to make it real. And people who were locked out and shut out and treated terribly fought to make it real, fought to make us all believe it. And when we believe it, no one can take it from us. Not this criminal in the White House, not his cronies in Congress, and it doesn't matter what they try to do. If we believe it, we will stop them. All right, guys, I will pick up this conversation again next week. I really appreciate your being part of it. Thank you so much.